Takes a moment here to get the right buttons. There we go. So, ask what's your favorite Torah story, and I am going to say every time it's the one we start today with Vayeishev, the story of Joseph. Here's my elevator pitch. It has everything: jealousy, conspiracy, attempted murder, subterfuge, seduction, redemption, all the things that make for a great show. So I think it's no surprise that Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice began their playwriting career with some 60 years ago with Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat.
Jacob wanted to show the world he loved his son, to make it clear that Joseph was the special one. So Jacob bought his son a coat, a multicolored coat to wear.
Joseph's coat was elegant, the cut was fine.
The tasteful style was the ultimate in good design.
And this is why it caught the eye.
A king would stop and stare.
And when Joseph tried it on, he knew his sheepskin days were gone. Such a dazzling coat of many colors, how he loved his coat of many colors. In a class above the rest, it even went well with his vest. Such a stunning coat of many colors, how he loved his coat of many colors. It was red and yellow and green and brown
And that coat of many colors has inspired graphic art for centuries. Welsh-born British architect and artist Owen Carter-Jones illustrated The History of Joseph and His Brethren, published in Victorian England. As a young man, Jones made a grand tour of historic art and architecture from Italy and Greece to Egypt and eventually Granada in southern Spain, where he fell in love with the intricate Islamic decoration of the Alhambra. That led him to create a unique 19th century style featuring geometric designs. You can see it as how he frames the picture. And his ornamental technique was carried over to popular wallpaper and eventually the Art Deco movement of the next century. In another frame from the book, here's Joseph sleeping with his many-colored coat on and dreaming of the 11 stars, bowing down to his own star. Not exactly the kind of dream his brothers wanted to hear about. Contemporary American artist and educator Star Weems chose another of his dreams for her Vayeishev image in her Ancient Illuminations series of paintings, one for each parashah. In this one, it's the brothers' wheat stalks bowing down before his. And actually, she includes the other dream. If you look in his hair, there's the sun and the moon and the stars. So both dreams in the one image. And as we'll read, those dreams led his jealous brothers to hatch a dastardly plot. This is such a theatrical story. And once they were rid of the dreamer, the coat figured into their plot to convince their father his favorite son had been killed by a wild beast. Here's that scene portrayed by another Victorian artist, Ford Madox Brown, known for his historical and biblical paintings. He shows us the older brothers with somewhat guilty expressions on their faces as they spread out the tattered coat to show Jacob the bloodstains and the shredded fabric, while at the old man's feet, Joseph's younger brother, Benjamin, casts a suspicious glare at his older brothers. Of course, we know, and will read, the hero was not killed, but sold into slavery by his brothers, who trade his life for 20 pieces of silver. Canadian Judaica artist and sofer Leah Crust shows that exchange as a very young Joseph awaits his fate with the Ishmaelite traders, who Leah Crust portrays as black, reflecting the trade between Africa and Europe. She does give the brothers a distinctly European look, though, going back to 14th century Spain for an inspiration, an illumination from a Sephardic Haggadah, the one known as the Sarajevo Haggadah, because of where it's preserved in the Museum of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Next, of course, the story moves to Egypt, where Joseph is sold to Potiphar, a wealthy advisor to the Pharaoh, and winds up in a bit of a sex scandal when Potiphar's wife, I tell you, it has everything, when Potiphar's wife attempts to seduce the handsome lad. The Italian Renaissance artists loved that part of the story. Here's Joseph and Potiphar's Wife by Guido Reni, a Baroque painter from Bologna, known primarily for religious and mythological works. Reni shows them in luxurious dress, befitting the high society position of the Potiphars. The lascivious wife grabs the robe of the slave Joseph, who's saying, "No, no," as he attempts to flee. Rainey's take is a bit demure. Most of his artistic counterparts, though, decided what the scene really needed was nudity. Il Guercino, the nickname of artist Giovanni Francesco Barbieri, leaves little doubt about what the wife has in mind, and little doubt that poor Joseph is terrified by the prospect. From the 19th century, Spanish artist Antonia Maria Esquivel shows us even more in José y la Mujer de Potifar. This setting and the wardrobe, what it is of it, look appropriately biblical, and long-haired Joseph seems to have a talit-like sash around his waist. Bringing it up to the 20th century, here's Joseph and Potiphar's Wife depicted by a Russian Empire artist, illustrator and designer Sergei Solomko. From an elite St. Petersburg family, he trained in Moscow and illustrated stories by authors from Pushkin to Chekhov, also created theater posters and costumes along the way. In 1910, he moved to Paris, and after the Russian Revolution, he fell out of favor, criticized in the Soviet era for vulgarity and decadence. But in the past couple of decades, Solomko's work has gone through something of a revival, with praise for his depiction of pre-revolutionary Russian life. For this one, Solomko gives us a youthful, playful Potiphar's wife with a noble, almost haughty Joseph, but haughty but beautiful. The seduction scene also appears in Islamic writings, including the Quran, but with something of a different take. This is from a 16th century Islamic text, the Bustan of Sa'adi, a collection of anecdotes and moral lessons drawn from the Quran and compiled by the Persian poet Sa'adi of Shiraz in the 13th century. The illumination shows Joseph, the prophet Yusuf in Muslim tradition, breaking away from Potiphar's wife, who is not given a name in the Torah, but the Quranic version identifies her as Zuleika. Not only that, they actually marry later on, something that perhaps is suggested by their playful expressions in this illumination. And here's that seduction scene from a 19th century Persian manuscript by Sofer Elia ben Nisan ben Eliyahu from the city of Mashhad, which was once home to a thriving Jewish community. The artist is not known, but the text is written in Judeo-Persian, so although the lettering may seem familiar, it's actually Hebrew transliteration of the original Persian narrative. Thanks again to Vic Greenspan for calling this to my attention, and here's another page from the Yusuf and Zuleika story where you can see more of that text. This is illustrating an anecdote about Zuleika proving to her girlfriends how beautiful Joseph is by calling him into the room while she's entertaining them, causing the girls to drop their oranges in awe of his beauty. Coming back to our time, New York artist and writer Richard McBee borrows a well-known 1960s movie image for one panel in his portfolio of Joseph and Potiphar's Wife, Mrs. P, Legs, and Joseph. You can almost hear him asking, "Mrs. Potiphar, are you trying to seduce me?" Richard McBee's articles about Jewish art and the Jewish art scene have appeared regularly in the Forward, and his own works have focused mainly on biblical themes for the past 50 years. In particular, for about 15 years or so, he's used art to explore, as he puts it, the pivotal role of women in biblical narratives. This panel from the portfolio has the naked Mrs. P holding not his robe, but his talit, and the now bare-chested Joseph appears to be zipping up. Finally, since we started with the coat, here's a little scene image by Theodore Geisel, Dr. Seuss, from his 1970s parody, Joseph Katz and His Coat of Many Colors, from a collection known as his Secret Works, paintings and sketches that he did at night just for his own and his family's enjoyment. So with Dr. Seuss, that's art for this take on Vayeishev.
Oh, that last one was the best. I never saw that.
One of the things I love about it is the sandals. I don't know if you noticed, the cat's got biblical sandals on.
Well
When I
done.
stumbled on that, I said, I have to include it in
At
here.
first I looked, I thought it was a peacock or a turkey because I couldn't see it.
Arnie, you've got a comment?
Yeah, you mentioned the Sarajevo Gata, and it's kind of cool, but the star of that book was my sister's mother-in-law, Miriam Bakovic. And of course, I got to dance with her at the wedding. Her sons are still alive and live in Israel. Um, and of course, you remember Geraldine Brooks' book about that called The People of the Book, about yeah, yeah, it's a great book. And it was so cool that I actually got to meet part of the history of that.
It's great to have that connection. That's great. Well, I guess no shortage of people who can use a Mishaberach. I want to mention Mike Bernstone, whom Heather and I and Elaine will be meeting with this week. So we'll relay everyone's regards. But Mike's dealing with some issues as well right now.
Sarah, somewhere on the screen. There you are. And Marilyn, who is not on the screen even.
She was a moment. No, she's there. She is. She's.
I'm here. I just
yeah.
Oh, there you are. Okay.
when I saw what I looked like, I decided to take myself off.
Okay.
I'd like to mention Nella just had a procedure, needs some.
She lost a fight with a dentist, and but she's recovered nicely. So thank you. I'll pass
Dentists always win. That's just it. It's like one of the wisdoms of life.
Or wisdom teeth, as
Yeah,
it may
really.
be.
No pun
Right.
intended.
A Misha Berach for my brother again, Shalom Ben Tzvi.
Is he out of the hospital, Arnie?
He is. He's slowly recovering. He's down to like 120 pounds. And he's struggling, It's sad.
I would like to also ask for a Mishaberach for my son's mother-in-law. She was just diagnosed with lupus. Not fun. Her name is Lynn.
See, others in our community, there would be Jan, Stuart, Sherry, and Alice.
And Marina she was not doing well last Shabbat.
Right. Marina.
I guess
My-
I'll
My
sign up.
friend Lee Slater on Oahu.
Heather.
Me too. Please.
Thank you.
I will add my sister, Kaya, our friend Gina, my neighbor Bob. I know I'm leaving people out. Anybody in the ether who needs one.
Amen.
Oh, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Desperate times call for desperate measures. I'm having my house pressure washed today, as it turned out, because I'm furiously trying to get ready to list my house. Okay. Misha Berachanu Makor HaBracha Litenu us the ones before us. Help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Amen.
Amen.
Misheber Imotenu Makor HaBracha Take us those in need of healing with revival shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Baruch atah Adonai
Adonai,
Eloheinu
Eloheinu,
melech
melech
haolam
haolam,
asher
asher
kitshanu
kitshanu
b'mitzvotav
v'tzivanu
v'tzivanu la'asot
la'asok
b'divrei
b'divrei
Torah.
Torah.
There is so much in this parashah. I don't even know how we can cover it all, but we're going to read chapter 37 in segments. We're going to start with about 1 through 12. I have 11 or 12 in my notes, and I forgot to double check which one, but we'll stop at some point close to there. Heather, you want to start us off since I know you won't be here later?
Sure. Okay. Now Jacob was settled in the land where his father had sojourned, the land of Canaan. This then is the line of Jacob. At 17 years of age, Joseph tended the flocks with his brothers as a helper to the sons of his father's wives, Bilhah and Zilpah. And Joseph brought bad reports to them of their father. Now Israel loved Joseph best for all of his sons, for he was a child of his old age, and he made him an ornamented tunic. And when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than his other brothers, they hated him, so that they did not speak a friendly word to him. Once Joseph had a dream, which he told to his brothers, and they hated him even more. He said to them, "Hear this dream which I have dreamed. There were binding sheaves in the field, when suddenly my sheaf stood up and remained upright. Then your sheaves gathered around me and bowed low to my sheaf." His brothers answered, "Do you mean to reign over us? Do you mean to rule over us?" And they hated him even more for his talk about his dreams. He dreamed another dream, and he told it to his brothers, saying, "Look, I have had another dream, and this time the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me." And when he told it to his father and brothers, his father berated him. "What?" he said to them. Is this dream that you have dreamed? Are we to come, I and your mother and your brothers, to bow to you to the ground?" So his brothers were wrought up with him, and his father kept the matter in mind.
All right. I think that that's a good place to stop. I was having this conversation with you earlier, and we, wonder why why Jacob merits being remembered as one of the 3 patriarchs. And I say it's for all the things he did wrong, not because of any things he did right. That is God first looks for an innocent who will listen, because God doesn't want to be the destroyer of humanity or anything else he put into that. Then we have Isaac, who is so damaged that we hardly hear of him. And then we have Jacob, who from the start in the womb already is wreaking havoc. And so here we are, does he get a taste of his own doings by having sons who are jealous of each other, and etc. So that's my contention. Yehuda?
I would add that, I think the question always lurks in the back of our minds is, why wasn't Joseph a patriarch? Because Joseph has such an important part in the story. And I think the main reason is exactly what you said, that Joseph, for all his youthful impetuousness growing into a mature adult, gets it right. He's always crediting everything he does to God. And this model is not the model of the flawed human being, which we actually need our patriarchs to epitomize. In particular, Jacob. I think that as we're writing this narrative, Abraham is this lofty individual, and Isaac is flawed. And here we have Jacob, who epitomized every single thing that a human being can mess up with. So obviously he has to be one of the forefathers.
Alan?
I think there's an interesting naivete about Joseph. I mean, it says at the beginning he's only 17, so he gets away with that. The youthful ignorance of what the world is like. But Jacob has experience with dreams, so I think it's very important that he's the one who calls it. He recognizes the power of what's going on here, and maybe he's a little frightened by it.
And he also has experience with a brother that hates him.
Yeah.
Yeah, the brotherly theme is huge, huge in this parashah. There's so many different stories, and it feels like the unifier among them has to do with siblinghood. Joel and then Arnie.
Good Shabbos, everybody.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbos.
Shabbat shalom. Thank you for bearing with me last week. Well, I agree with what you said, but I still always think it's so important to keep things in context. And for us to know what life was like, 3,500 years ago, 1500 BCE, what the other cultures were doing, what his own brother, I'm talking about the comments about Yaakov, his own brother, by comparison, was far worse. So maybe what Esau was doing was how many of the people lived in those times. So he stood out as being, not just a father, but somewhat struggling with to be a righteous person in those times and in that generation. I just say, like last night, being over here in Pune, sometimes there's nothing happening. So I went to a Krishna event. There were 100 people there. The level of consciousness of idol worship, the things they were talking about, in 2025, it was, the food was delicious and I shouldn't have been having it, but it's all vegetarian. But it's such a low level of praising the creator in front of the statues and everything. My mind is boggled, so I can only imagine what life was like 3,500 years ago.
Arnie?
Well, they probably didn't have as good prasadam back then, but I just was going to comment on Yehuda's remarks about how flawed all our heroes are in the Torah, everyone, which I think gives flawed people like me hope. If it was just, descriptions of the, Superman and, Hercules and all these other guys who aren't flawed, who are perfect, I wouldn't be inspired, so I think it's good storytelling, and that's why it's endured. I said this before, about the mices, and booba mices and stuff like that. It's the stuff that lasts.
Thank you. Ruth Ellen?
Well, you see it in everyday lives. It's in everybody's life, so we can relate to it. It's not like far distant. It's here, and I think that's part of why it has prevailed. It survives.
Ruth Ellen, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, as usual, I tend to look at this a little more metaphorically, but it's also like a bridge between our physical lives and the spiritual lives. To Yehuda's point about being imperfect and the heroes being imperfect. Every origin story, the heroes are imperfect. But I was just thinking about it, like the Greek gods. It's the gods all have their Achilles heel, but here it's human beings that personify certain traits. And then it goes to what we always talk about Aviva, which is the continuum instead of the black and the white. If we didn't have sorrow, if we didn't have jealousy, what would we have to compare it to? So this is all, again, bringing in Arnie. You tell a story and you show the contrast very dramatically, and then people can see it, so, but, and again, with faith and hope, there's always another chance for redemption, and to follow through. And again, even in terms of who's considered a patriarch, that is almost a little bit too much vanity, because that goes to the whole point. It's all important. It's all a thread. We're all the same energy DNA going through. So, you needed every step along the way, even when there was a faltering, even at the Akedah and all that. And then more specifically, I was thinking again, in Musar, they say the midot that you try to do to be holy, the basic one is humility. So right here we have Jacob and all the brothers not being humble. They're being vain, and the first thing they thought about is, what does this mean to me? So I think that's an important lesson, that it's there so early, and again, that's why it's kind of a parable of that. Thank you.
You know, you say they're being vain, and yet the model of vanity here is the way Joseph deals with his coat of many colors.
And we didn't hear from Dina.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's true. That also shows no one's perfect. But then we also, don't we give some credence to maturity? Again, you think when Joseph was one of the youngest sons. I was just thinking about Stephen Colbert always talking about he's the 11th of the 11 children, and in a lot of ways they would tend to be coddled even by the older brothers when he was younger. They thought they had the upper hand, but now it seems like something's happening to him and in his maturity, but he's still a little too naive to recognize it. And also maybe because he's a teenager, he's a little bit cocky about it.
How about the fact that, Jacob sort of sets Joseph up this way by giving him that coat? Because Jacob, oh my God, there is a garment thread that goes through this portion, the garment later with Potiphar too.
And with Tamar.
And with Tamar, right.
I want to stay to the
three garment things in this particular portion. That's one of the threads.
I want to call on Sarah and then Craig and stay with these. I divided it this way to stay with these lines. We know the rest of the story, but I wanted to see what threads are established right here at the beginning. So Sarah and then Craig.
So the idea that these brothers became the 12 tribes of Israel. So, and I have a class with Chabad Rebbitzin during the week, and she was talking about how all of the brothers followed in Jacob's path, and they were all, amazing people to become the leaders of the 12 tribes. And of course, then I had to pipe up and said, but, they threw their brother in a thing and they were jealous and all these things. So I think there's a little bit of reckoning between, were they good people or were they not good people, or maybe a little bit of both. But I mean, they did go to him in Egypt and they did make that whole transaction with him back and forth between Jacob, but they also lied to their father and caused him to mourn for many years. But then, okay, so we'll get back to the mourning thing, because that's a whole
Definitely.
nother, that's
Yeah.
a whole nother thing that I have something to say about later.
Good.
But just reckoning with how good, so, what she was saying is that they all followed in Jacob's path, in that they all lived in his house. They were all Jews and they all like studied Torah or whatever. But they did not have the attributes of of Joseph. And that's why he got the multicolored coat, because he had more abilities than they did to live in the world. He was able to actually live in the world and not be tempted by it and distracted by it. He was able to go into Egypt and be in, you can imagine what Egypt was like at that time, probably full of temptation and all kinds of excess. And so, anyway, I just wanted to kind of bring that out, that the multicolored coat, she thinks, represents all these attributes that that Joseph had, that the other brothers didn't. Not that they didn't have any good attributes, but they just couldn't like handle the world like he could.
Hmm.
But they had this other side also, that there's this other spiritual side that they followed their father. So I just wanted to put that little tidbit in there.
All of what you said was really wise.
Craig, and then Arnie.
Well, I'm always interested in how these Torah stories play out in the real world, the political world, and the Islamic approach to Jacob is quite different. They regard him as a perfect man. They eliminate any reference to Esau and the struggle there. And then he was, and insofar as his encounter with struggling with God, they talk about him submitting to God and that he was a good guy. And so they have quite a different view of Jacob than we're talking about here.
And actually, that wording about the relationship of God and Jacob is coming up in the next. Well, it's coming up. There's a very clear indication that Jacob was not ever walking alone through all his story.
Mm-hmm.
Arnie?
I don't think he was studying Torah.
No.
Oh, is that what you wanted to say?
Yeah, because Sarah mentioned that.
Yeah.
So there was
Why not?
Because it wasn't written
it
yet.
wasn't
It wasn't
written
written yet.
It doesn't matter though, because it was always written from the beginning of time. And so Abraham saw it, Isaac saw it, this was sort of handed down, just this belief in one God shifts your mind to a whole different way of thinking about things.
Yeah,
So
there's one law, 10 laws, and 600 and something laws.
That's right.
I mean,
that's right.
the difference.
I agree
You
with
only
you.
need the one law. I mean, the one rule. That's the essence of everything, right? So I agree with you there.
Yeah.
No, I was
That's what I mean. And I agree with
Yeah.
you that they didn't have the laws, but they knew a way of living. Like Abraham knew, he opened his tent up to people. He washed their feet, all the dirt off their feet. They had a consciousness already that they knew without having all these written laws yet, that they knew it's a way of life. The Torah is a way to live. So,
Gotcha.
yeah.
Alan?
Well, I think this whole discussion raises, in my mind at least, a question, because the Torah doesn't answer this, at least not in the wording. So it must be somewhere in Mishnah or Talmudic discussions. But nowhere does it say that Jacob passed on to his sons that they were going to be the leaders of this community and this nation, whatever we want to call it. They were busy, as Joel pointed out, they were busy working. They were out in the field with the sheep and raising, wheat and all the other things. And I don't get an image of Jacob sitting around saying, well, I had this dream, and the dream said we're going to be, and my dad had this experience, and we had all of this in our future. None of that is laid out. So how do they know that they are going to be the leaders that are going to carry on? They're just living life. And Joseph's getting in the way of this.
We have to wait till chapter something later on about Jacob blessing his sons.
Mm-hmm.
And he's got the observations of over a long period of time, and the blessings actually refer specifically to each one individually.
Right.
So, yeah, he's
and that's why I said the other ones, they were shepherds. They were out. They didn't have all the attributes that Joseph had. That multicolored coat represents. They were in the world more than Joseph was.
Yeah.
Joseph was in the world, but he wasn't of the world. So let's say it that way.
At 17, probably not quite,
I still think that that Yaakov saw something different in Joseph, that he had more of the attributes than his brothers did. Yeah, they were out, representing the field with the sheep, doing their everyday thing in the world. As soon as they heard the dream, they got jealous. Whereas I think Jacob had a little bit, I think that Yaakov saw something different in Jacob, and that's why he got the multicolored coat, maybe represents, the different attributes or the different positive things that he saw in Joseph that he didn't see in his other
That it
sons.
was similar to his own upbringing? He hung around the tents with his mom, as did Joseph.
And we know ourselves and our children, we see different attributes.
Yes,
Different
and
strengths, different weaknesses. We see their overall personalities. I mean, I don't think this is rocket science. You just look at you know what your children are.
and
How did we
also there's
get
no
multicolored coat? I mean, it doesn't say multicolored coat. It says ornamental garment or something like that. I can't remember exactly, but it doesn't specifically say that.
Where
Yeah,
did that come from? That's a good point. Where did that must come from
right.
somewhere.
yeah, so the Hebrew is non-specific. It just says coat of striped
Ornamental
coat.
tunic.
Yeah. Um, so in the words we're searching for to firm up in our minds this image that he was favored, there is no shortage. There is no shortage of the Torah using very specific words to tell us about Joseph and why he was different. So first of all, the first mention of Joseph in his parashah is his age. I think that's very significant. I think it is a hedge to absolve him a little bit. Next is the idea that the things that he says that are so objectionable are the stuff of dreams. And, modern dream interpretation will tell us we are not responsible for what's in our dreams, or that we stew so much over something that we can't get rid of it even in our dreams, and our dreams elaborate on it, right? But the idea of removing it from reality into the dream state is very significant. And then we know already from before that there was a favorite wife. So already we have like a huge amount of weight to this idea. And then that it doesn't say that he gave him a gown of a striped gown. It said he made for him. There's so much in here that actually does infer a favorite status on him. So it's not hard to imagine how that became part of the story. Let's see, Ruth Ellen and then Craig.
Okay, yeah, so I was thinking of this idea of the fly on the wall, and like what Sarah was saying, they knew. So these stories are being passed down. And then I realized, oh, it's a matter of efficiency. We start out with Cain and Abel, then we have 2 sons again. Now we have 12, then we're going to have 40,000. So, the story of Rebecca, we knew that Hashem told her that they were going to struggle and that the younger was going to, they had all this lore or this impact from Hashem that was already there. And you can assume maybe around the dinner table, they did talk about it, but we don't know, but it's not explicitly put there. So probably, and then when Alan said they had no idea who was going to get what, they were probably going along with the civilization of the time that the oldest child would get the birthright. But maybe they had enough stories of what happened with their own father to see that all of a sudden when Joseph is doing these special things, and when Joseph is tattletaling on his brothers for not doing things right, they're saying, is this the start of the uprising of the younger to steal something? So that's got them going. So they do have these stories that are inculcated in them, but not as officially, as we were used to. And then the other thing is, we're always going back and forth between the intuition of a human being or what they know. And when Sarah said Joseph saw something in him, and parents always know this feeling. And yet Jacob is a patriarch. He did have this encounter with Hashem and had his name changed and everything. So are we not to say that it wasn't just that he saw something, he intuitively or through however he communicated with Hashem, recognized that this was so there again, this is where like the fate and the will of God comes in relative to the role of human beings in human nature. So it's that's why we don't know for sure, because it's always left balancing the two.
In no place in this particular parashah is there any kind of communication between God and Jacob. This is a story on its own without that. And this what Aviva just said about Jacob made a coat of with stripes on it and gave it to his son. And when his son tells him of the second dream, because the second dream specifically references Jacob, he takes it under advisement, basically. And it's almost like he is I gave him this coat that, showed my favoritism for him. And this is what resulted for it. What am I going to do about this? And he doesn't. I think Jacob is not necessarily the one who acts very clearly on things that he understands. It's like, it's almost like reading his mind. Did I mess up here? And I would also say that 17 is not 13. In this time and place, as it was referenced before by Craig, kids grew up faster. And even Joseph hung out in the tents with the women. I think that's, you don't give someone a really fancy clothes to go out and work in the field. That doesn't go together. Every time we go in the garden, we change to garden clothes. We don't wear our nice stuff when we're working in the garden.
Craig, and then Ruthell, and then Marilyn. Wow.
I think we may be overcomplicating this, because it seems to me in these initial stories, the favored brother is always determined by the favored mother. I assumed that Joseph was most loved because he was the product of Rachel, the true love of Jacob. And if you look back at the way, his forefathers were treated, Jacob was the favorite of his mother. And then obviously Ishmael got shirked to the side because he was not the son of Sarah. So it's the son of the quote unquote Jewish mother that gets the favor.
Well said.
Or let me add to that. Perhaps, excuse me, perhaps he had the attributes of Rachel.
And the beauty.
What she did at the well showed a lot of who she was. And perhaps, besides that, Jacob loved her. He saw in his son those attributes that were in Rachel.
Yep. Oh, Ruth Ellen.
I just had a really quickly. It's not a rebuttal to Yehuda, but I take issue a little bit that it said it didn't happen in that section. This is a chronological story, and it's all part of a whole. I didn't say it happened in that section, but of course, we're partly of what we're doing here because so little is explicitly written. Even if you accept as translated as unchangeable. It's just trying to get into their heads now. And sometimes I feel like when we talk about the times and all this, we're talking like psychiatrists or psychologists or therapists. And then when we're talking about the spiritual, we're talking like shaman and rabbis, So but I specifically don't want to leave hanging that just because it wasn't explicit in that parsha doesn't mean that it wasn't valid. Okay, thank you.
Marilyn?
Well, I was thinking also with regard to the age thing that I mean, there's been some research done on the human brain over the years. How true it is or how exact, I don't know. But that being said, males tend to develop more slowly. And from what the latest stuff seems to say, that all those, the frontal lobes, et cetera, the places where impulsivity would necessarily be controlled, some of that stuff they're not saying it's developed until around 25. There's a big difference between 17 and 25. It doesn't, having raised a son who he got himself into a little trouble. He's okay now, but he wasn't okay then. And it's taken a while for him to fully, and who knows if fully is even the right word. Having a child certainly helped him snap into a better space in the world, because he realizes what both his responsibility and the love that he has for his kid, how that would play out, but with his parents and moving forward, the development and the understanding, having gone through more life. So I don't know how much we want to, I don't think it was lovely, but I also don't know that his behavior can be graded as heavily as, because he was 17 and not 13. I don't think so.
So thank you, Marilyn. I'm going to build on what you just said, because I was going to address this subject. The New York Times or Washington Post, whichever, had an article this week again about, markers that now science tells us that our intuition or observation was correct about, that there are stages at which the brain clearly changes.
Mm-hmm.
And those phases in life have been recognized by society even before science could put an image to it. So I'm going to sound like I'm changing the subject and talk about what is going on right now in Australia with this decision to say, you know what? Maybe you don't need social media, access to social media, free access to social media until after age 16. Does that seem arbitrary? Does it seem arbitrary that in Western societies that have elections, the average age at which people vote seems to be fairly similar? I think the mention of an age in the Torah is very important. It's important because it's observational and it's not random. And the observation of it tells us at 17, a person, or Joseph, has some abilities and is developing and has an ability to account for the past and study, but is not yet fill in the blank. Right. And I think it's very prescient to look at it that way, especially if we like to read Torah in our day. We read Torah in our day. We read Torah with the background of what's happening in the world. And I think that Torah is helping us to understand that some things always are true, regardless of whatever situation you throw around them. And one thing that's true is that no matter how much young people have access to information, it does not promote wisdom or maturity. It is just that. And I think the case of what's going on in Australia right now is a really good indication of that, of adults saying that it's not making our kids wiser, and it's possibly hurting their brains. And we should be mindful of that as adults, we always have the responsibility, just like when we decide to send kids off to war. We have a responsibility that their moral fabric does not disintegrate. We've never been absolved of that responsibility. Why should we give it up? And I think it's very important.
Is that, we spoke of the voting age a little bit ago. We changed that to accommodate sending them to war. That was the truth, because the age was 21, and then we made it 18 because we were shipping them off to war at 18.
Let's see, we have Joel and then Arnie. And then we move on.
I was driving before it, so I didn't see who mentioned the Quran. Who mentioned the Quran before? But I thought I'd tell a little story. Um, Around this time, I was on a bus in Yerushalayim, Yer HaKodesh, and I think I'd woken up from a dream, and I saw like the Quran and the Torah, sort of like a Venn diagram, partly fighting each other and partly overlapping. So I got on a bus, and there was a Palestinian and an Arab boy there sitting next to a frum-looking guy. So I said to him, "Is Yosef mentioned in the Quran?" And he proceeded to recite all the lines, and it was a very surreal moment for me. Anyway, I just posted in the chat. I just asked the AI, please give me all of the lines about Yosef in the Quran, and I'll just share. I put it in the chat, but I'll just for reference, Surah 12. I mean, we have to be a little interfaith, I guess. And by the way, there were some amazing Palestinian tour guides in my tour guide class. When Joseph said to his father, "Oh, my father, indeed I have seen in a dream 11 stars, the sun and the moon. I saw them prostrating to me." He said, "Oh, my son, do not relate your vision to your brothers, or they will contrive against you a plan. Indeed, Hasatan to man is a manifest enemy, and thus will your Lord choose you and teach you the interpretation." Anyway, lahavdil, but they do get a lot of this background from a unique perspective. So I just thought it was interesting.
Arnie?
Yeah, I would just like to make a general opinion about this forum. I'm really anxious to hear more of the story, and if we could come to agreement to, let's say, everyone gets 3 comments or a certain amount of time. I love hearing everybody. It's just that my motivation is to study Torah here. So I don't know if anyone else would agree with me.
This is something I struggle with, so I will accept any and all assistance in moving us forward. And that being said, I would like to move forward. And it's going to be a long reading. It's actually going to be all the way through line 36 now. So whoever feels like they got energy and breath. Arnie. Or anyone, because I can't hear and now I'm not seeing the screen. Let's see.
Arnie is muted.
I was muted. I'm sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
One time, when his brothers had gone to pasture their father's flock at Shechem, Israel said to Joseph, "Your brothers are pasturing at Shechem. Come, I will send you to them." He answered, "I am ready." And he said to him, "Go and see how your brothers are and how the flocks are faring, and bring me back word." So he sent him from the valley of Hebron. When he reached Shechem, a man came upon him wandering in the fields. The man asked him, "What are you looking for?" He answered, "I'm looking for my brothers. Could you tell me where they are pasturing?" The man said, "They have gone from here, for I have heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Joseph followed his brothers and found them at Dothan. They saw him from afar, and before he came close to them, they conspired to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes that dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits, and we can say a savage beast devoured him. We shall see what comes of his dreams." But when Reuben heard it, he tried to save him from them. He said, "Let us not take his life." And Reuben went on, "Shed no blood. Cast him into the pit out in the wilderness, but do not touch him yourselves," intending to save him from them and restore him to his father. When Joseph came up to his brothers, they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the ornamental tunic that he was wearing. And they took him and cast him into the pit. The pit was empty. There was no water in it. Then they sat down to meal. Looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead, their camels bearing gum, balm, ladanum, and he'd taken to Egypt. Ladanum meaning opium? I don't know. Joseph said to his brothers, "What do we gain by killing our brother and covering up his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites. but let us not do away with him ourselves. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh. His brothers agreed. When the Midianite traders passed by, they pulled Joseph out of the pit. They sold Joseph for 20 pieces of silver to the Ishmaelites, who brought Joseph to Egypt. When Reuben returned to the pit and saw that Joseph was not in the pit, he rent his clothes. Returning to his brothers, he said, "The boy is gone. Now what am I to do?" Then they took Joseph's tunic, slaughtered a kid, and dipped the tunic in the blood. They had the ornamental tunic taken to the father, and they said, "We found this. Please examine it. It is your son's tunic or not?" He recognized it and he said, "My son's tunic. A savage beast devoured him. Joseph was torn by a beast." Jacob rent his clothes, put sackcloth on his loins, and observed mourning for his son many days. And his sons and his daughters sought to comfort him, for he refused to be comforted, saying, "No, I will go down mourning to my son in Sheol." Thus his father bewailed him. The Midianites, meanwhile, sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, a courier of Pharaoh and his chief steward.
What?
Okay, go ahead. I muted whoever that noise was coming from. Oh, actually, that was it, right? Okay. I think Robert is Barry's brother.
Barry's brother, yeah.
Welcome and Shabbat Shalom, Robert. Okay, Alan, you have your hand up, and then Yehuda has his hand up.
Well, something jumped out at me at the very beginning of that reading, and Arnie, it was a great reading, by the way, so thank you for that. But that Jacob is referred to as Israel at this point.
Noted.
And later on, there are times when Jacob is referred to as Israel, and there's a particular purpose for it. Now, I'm not sure I understand why in this particular time, because his name isn't mentioned again for the rest of the reading. They just brought him to their father, and
the way I've always taken it is every time it references Jacob is the human, Israel is the promise, and I've always taken it that way. Every time it switches in Israel, this moves forward the narrative of the promise. There was a wonderful thing that Aviv and I listened to this morning at Rabbi Sachs, where he equates this Jacob was not comforted after he's basically the brothers set a situation up, but they didn't actually lie. They brought a bloody tunic. They didn't say so and so. Jacob assumed that. And that's a pretty amazing thing. But then what Rabbi Sachs mentions is that by him not taking comfort, the reason he didn't take comfort is because there wasn't really evidence of his son dying.
Yeah.
All he got was blood and cloth. And this is like the first instance in the Torah of circumstantial evidence, because there are always these firsts in the Torah, and this is one of them. And what Rabbi Sachs says is by presenting it this way, Jacob also has hope. And I thought, wow, he's equating the inability to be comforted by something with there's a hope that something can still come out of this that's good and positive.
Craig?
That's what I was going to say, the exact same thing. I read Rabbi Sachs the other day, and one of my questions was why did Jacob mourn for so long? That's a long time to mourn. And the answer is because he didn't really think his son was dead.
You know, Viva brought up, this is exactly the situation that was happening with the hostages in Israel. There was no closure.
Oh, that's a very good point. I like that. Yeah.
Craig?
Good analogy.
I thought Alan might beat me to it, but when the story goes that Joseph gets sold for 20 pieces of silver, he officially becomes the first silverman in Jewish history.
Little Jewish humor.
We'll take it.
Amen.
I was going to bring up the subject of there's a word that comes up twice in this parashah, Vayeishev, and in this part, it is that Joseph refused to be comforted. He could not be comforted. He refused. It's an action he takes. He will not be comforted. And I did want to relate that to the greater view of two things that seem to stem from this story. One is the need to put defined periods of time for mourning, because there's an inability to move on until you have finished mourning. And the other is that the idea of proof of death in order to start the process of mourning, because you can't finish the process of mourning if you can't start it, that does tie directly to the understanding of why even the last of the known dead hostages has to somehow, there's no ability to finish mourning until you can start. And that does come from this direct story. And the quote from here is, I won't find it right now. When I find it, I will just put it in the chat. But basically, he is not able to, not that he refuses to be comforted. He is not able to be comforted. And that word comes when we read about Potiphar's wife and Joseph refusing her. It's that very same word, Vayeishev. Okay, Ruth Ellen.
By the way, what Craig brought up with the 20 pieces of silver, wasn't that how much the cave of Machpelah was also? I'm pretty sure. It's also the
more.
default, it's also default in the ketubah as well.
What I couldn't
go ahead, say it again.
I couldn't understand what you said, Yehuda. Could you repeat that?
It said that the 20 that Craig brought up, the 20 pieces of silver.
Uh-huh.
The 20 pieces of silver, I believe that the cave of Machpelah, the original burying place,
I think that was
also cost 20 pieces of silver, and we see it come up in the traditional ketubah. If you don't change it, the traditional writing in Aramaic references 20 pieces of silver also. So I read something this morning that sort of, said that wasn't a lot of money, that they sold them as a bargain, but in reality, buying land or buying your wife per se is actually a very, very expensive thing.
It does say 400 shekels of silver in the cave, in the purchase of the cave, but we don't know how many shekels equal a piece.
No.
So, can you break a piece? I need a couple of shekels. So.
Well, your wife is a piece.
Ay, ay, ay.
Not going there.
$60 an ounce now for silver, just to get a relative, view of this.
Ruth Ellen, I'm going to read what is in the chat also. Go ahead, Ruth Ellen.
Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry, I almost forget. I was trying to find a Safari or whatever, because this gets me every year too. Maybe it's too picky. I'm still a little confused where Ruvain was, how Yehuda, Judah went and made this decision to keep his brothers from killing him, which was, they're all MacGyver in this episode. What are they going to use right there? But I don't know, why was Ruvain not with the rest of them, that he knew all this? And then for the first time, I noticed that it didn't even seem like they let Ruvain in on what happens, because what am I going to do now? But I guess the intimation is he saw them sell. I mean, that's what I always assumed. And now I see it wasn't explicitly said there.
Was he the oldest?
Leading narrative, and I think that if you looked at the sources of who wrote, you would actually find that each one of these was a different source.
Wasn't he the oldest, Reuven?
Yes.
Well, that's part of it, I would imagine.
But in the competing narrative, we follow this with the story of Tamar, and Judah wins the narrative. Because ultimately Judah wins the narrative in Egypt also, when he is the one who offers himself in exchange. And the line that leads to the King David is through Judah.
Right.
And all the line goes through Judah. So Judah ultimately wins the narrative. But it was nice that the editors decided to keep the Reuben part in anyway. They could have cut it out.
So now it says, then we have two sets of older brothers. We have the two older brothers of Leah's issue, and then yeah, I know. So it's like a compound thing. Now the other thing, every time I notice closer details, in the first section about when they see the caravan coming, they said they sold them to the Ishmaelites, which is interesting that Craig brought up what the Muslims say about it. Because, and that they don't mention Esau. Esau, in a way, was an Ishmaelite because his wife was the daughter of Ishmael. I mean, daughter of Ishmael. And then when it said they sold them, they said they sold them to the Midianites. And it doesn't seem important, and yet I guess but to me now I'm bringing it all back together. I mean, all these people were cousins, let's face it, right? So it's like when we make these nationalistic and tribal decisions, is that part of the lesson here? And we don't take it from a place of love and goodness, but jealousy. This is where all the trouble begins. And I know it's a more subtle thread, but if we're looking for the whole picture of this as a way to deal with seemingly unanswerable questions and how to live on this earth, I think that puts it in a different context, and we have to constantly be reminded of that, especially when 5,500 years later, we still have these same tribal disasters going on.
Add to the competing narrative, Reuben ends up being condemned for his actions over what happened with Dinah, because Reuben led the massacre. So who wins the line that moves forward?
When you put it that way, it's almost like this is the biblical version of the survival of the fittest, right? Because they all have their good and bad points, but in the end,
Succession.
Alan?
Since Yehuda mentioned editing, I'm always complaining about the editing in the Torah, and I wonder about that encounter that Joseph has with the man, who's only identified as a man, to be directed to where his brothers are. Because I'm thinking of in terms of an editor, I can cut that out. I don't need that in the story. Joseph was sent out to find his brothers. He found his brothers. You don't have to have, every step along the way. So I wonder why it was important to have that man there. And is it, as we've had in several previous parashot, the man isn't really a man.
It's an angel, or something.
And why?
There are a lot of interesting explanations to that. And, in my attempt to stick to the pshat, to the overtly simplistic, the man is less important than the fact that Joseph sees him as a man. In other words, it puts Joseph in a place, right? He is not all-knowing. His dreams may be dreams. He may be prescient, but he's a youth in the field and he is lost. And he looks to someone who he presumes has more knowledge than him. So it's a way of placing him somewhere. Not above, but below. That's the explanation that I like, that fits my interpretation. Someone had their hand up, I thought. Okay.
Well, can I just say one thing real quick? The fact that the man was there, if the man, quote man, is an angel or a close representative or Hashem himself, it does leave us with the fact that we're not alone and that there is guidance, and that, you know, that going forward, that's there, and that's how the people in fact do survive and make it, because it's not just strictly up to their own devices. If that person is in fact an ambassador of Hashem in some way, I think that isn't unimportant, whether Joseph knew it or not.
But what an interesting test if that's the case then, because the angel, if it's an angel, is directing him, and in your interpretation, Marilyn, as at God's, because it's part of God's plan, directing him to a near-death experience.
Yeah.
And you know, this
I said it.
maybe he has to go through that. Maybe the answer is he has to go through that in order for the rest of the story to proceed. But
Right.
it just seems like, you know, angels, the ones we've had like who show up usually are saying, "This is something wrong. Don't do this. Let me show you the right way." And here he's being directed to a pretty grim set of circumstances.
But as I said if. I'm not pretending to know.
Okay, so for what just said, just made me think of something else. Is this like a vast older brother conspiracy? Because the whole narrative, they told Joseph, I mean, they told Jacob they were going to Shechem or whatever, you know. So this also goes back to why they always felt like Joseph was spying on them and talking back to his father. Well, here they weren't where they said they were supposed to be. Why did they leave? It says they leave. They didn't tell why they were going to leave. Why would that man even have overheard where they were leaving? Except, and then the next thing we know, he says, "Oh, here he comes. They can see him on the hill. Let's kill him." Is this part of a whole plan they were setting up to have Joseph follow them into this setup? You know, it does beg all these questions after a while. And then into that whole thing, did it have to go down this way in order to set up the whole future that Abraham already saw, that there was going to be a famine, that we're going to have to leave and come back, and all these things that were foretold? I wonder about that too, if that was not handed down word of mouth. And it's almost like a which came first, the chicken or the egg. It was a self-fulfilled prophecy. I mean, at every turn, you can just get more and more confused. Maybe that's the idea. So
I don't know,
coming
you know,
back
I
every
think
year.
to add to what you're saying, I think that, you know, I mean, there were probably famines in the land ever so often. It was just a matter of time when there would be a famine, so they knew it was coming. That's
They
possible
didn't have
too.
refrigerators.
Yeah.
Right.
Arnie?
Yeah, I read some obscure reference to who the man was. I wanted to share it with you. It says here his name was Chaim Yankel. This is the first reference to him. So with that, let's move on.
Okay, so actually, I do want to move on. There's so many different stories here. So we are now at the next line, which is the beginning of the next chapter, and I had it divided as let's do 1 through 12. So who wants to read 1 through 12?
You want me to read it? It's about me.
Sure.
Okay. About that time, Judah left his brothers and camped near a certain Adullamite whose name was Hirah. There, Judah saw the daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shuah, and he married her and cohabited with her. At least he did it in the right order. She conceived and bore a son and named him She conceived again and bore a son and named him Onan. Once again, she bore a son and named him Shelah. He was at Chezib when she bore him. Now, Judah got a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was displeasing to the Lord, and the Lord took his life. Then Judah said to Onan, join with your brother's wife and do your duty by him, but by her as a brother-in-law, and provide offspring for your brother. But Onan, knowing that the seed would not count as his, let it go to waste whenever he joined with his brother's wife, so as not to provide offspring for his brother. What he did was displeasing to the Lord, and he took his life also.
I'm going to interrupt for just a minute. I apologize. I was looking at the wrong note. I did mean for us to read this whole book, this whole chapter. So if it gets too much for you that just let
No
someone
problem.
else.
I'm planning to read the whole thing.
Okay, go for it.
Then Judah said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, stay as a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up, for he thought he too might die like his brothers. So Tamar went to live in her father's house, actually her father-in-law's house. A long time afterwards, Shua's daughter, the wife of Judah, died. When his period of mourning was over, Judah went up to Timnah to his sheep shearers, together with his friend Hirah the Adullamite. And Tamar was told, your father-in-law is coming up to Timnah for the sheep shearing. So she took off her widow's garb, covered her face with a veil, and, wrapping herself up, sat down at the entrance to Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah was grown up, and yet she had not been given to him as a wife. When Judah saw her, he took her for a harlot, for she had covered her face. So he turned aside to her by the road and said, here, let me sleep with you, for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. What, she asked, will you pay for sleeping with me? He replied, I will send a kid from my flock. But she said, you must leave a pledge until you have sent it. And he said, what pledge shall I give you? And she replied, your seal and cord and the staff which you carry. So he gave them to her and slept with her, and she conceived by him. Then she went on her way. She took off her veil and again put on her widow's garb. Judah sent the kid by his friend the Adullamite to redeem the pledge from the woman, but he could not find her. He inquired of the people of that town, where is the cult prostitute, the one at Enaim by the road? But they said, there has been no prostitute here. So he returned to Judah and said, I could not find her. Moreover, the townspeople said, there has been no prostitute here. Judah said, let her keep them, lest we become a laughing stock. I did send her this kid, but you did not find her. About 3 months later, Judah was told, your daughter-in-law Tamar has played the harlot. In fact, she is with child by harlotry. Bring her out, said Judah, and let her be burned. As she was being brought out, she sent this message to her father-in-law. I am with child by the man to whom these belong. And she added, examine these whose seal and cord and staff are these. And Judah recognized them and said, she is more in the right than I, inasmuch as I did not give her to my son Shelah. And he was not intimate with her again. When the time came for her to give birth, there were twins in her womb. While she was in labor, one of them put out his hand, and the midwife tied a crimson thread on that hand to signify this one came out first. But just then he drew back his hand, and out came his brother. And she said, what a breach you have made for yourself. So he was named Perez. Afterwards, his brother came out, on whose hand was the crimson thread, and he was named Zerah.
Okay. All right. Anybody see any parallels to any other stories we've read?
I think.
Yes, and how, but I always forget that this story, this is not one we had a lot in Sunday school and when I was 12, you know.
Really?
I always forget that it shows up here though. I think I mix it up with Dina's story. But anyway, yeah, and all I was rolling my eyes thinking, men, God, he was so horny on the road that man, I mean, you know, he's gonna give a he could have just she didn't have anything to give her, he could have gone on this merry way. But anyway.
I always think of this as one of those, now a word from our sponsor. Because what does this have to what went before and what's coming after? It's a totally different story. And
I guess because later on, I don't remember. That's why the genealogies come in. The two twins. I mean, did Joshua not? Is Joshua the one who did not descend from? Was Joshua was from the house of Judah, wasn't he? I mean, I think maybe that all matters
Nun.
later that they put it in there now. Do you know Yehuda? Go ahead.
It's Joshua's in the house of Nun. I think that this is very specific to firming up what just happened when we had the dual narratives between Reuben and Judah. And that we actually basically have to show, or the editors had to show that Judah did right. When he didn't do right, he corrected himself. And, you know, this is an admirable thing. You know, Judah understood that he made a mistake and he corrected himself. And he also, you know, he also was honorable in that he did not sleep with Tamar again. Also, he did the right thing when it was pointed out that he made a mistake. The deception here is just part of this story of Jacob that just runs deception in and out of everything. And where does deception lead? You know, this is yet another iteration of how deception is used in the greater narrative, which we see also with with Joseph in Egypt when he deceives his brothers and doesn't tell, et cetera, et cetera. You know, there are common threads that go through this.
Speaking of threads,
Can I just pipe in real because again, this hit me for the first time because when I first read it, I got, oh, was Judah committing adultery? Like here again, as the crowd gets bigger, we don't have the stories of how every one of the 12 sons took a wife. You know, so then, but when it said he took a Canaanite as his wife, and all before this, remember, Abraham sent Eliezer. We were not going to marry among the strangers we're living with. And now all of a sudden this says to me, but wait a minute, did that go all out the window? You know, again, so is it important here only for this story that we get the narrative of how Yehuda came to have a wife? We don't know. Maybe I forgot. Maybe later on there are other when it's relevant, then we learn. Or when Joseph gives the blessings, we know that all his sons had children, so they were married. But I don't remember now if again, since they don't mention the mothers a lot. But now that just struck me as important that he saw her and he liked her. He didn't ask for his father's permission. He didn't do nothing, and it's plopped in the middle of this story here. So again, I'm wondering about the editing of that. That's just something that kind of tugs at me. I thought I'd bring up. Any thoughts?
Greg has his hand up.
I just think there are some lessons here. For example, we should not name our boys E-R. I don't think that's his name. And as for Tamar, and you think about the world's oldest profession, prostitution, maybe there's some humor here because when she's offered a baby goat, her response had to be, "You've got to be kidding."
My goodness.
I'm sitting here trying to imagine Craig using his humor in court.
I use it all over the place, but seriously, the reference to prostitution, it's pretty profound so early in the Bible, right? And I don't know if that's the first reference or if we've had other examples of adultery, but I'm not sure that I realized that there was overt prostitution mentioned so early in the Torah.
The story of Dinah already uses the same word.
You know, it just sort of proves that, you know, the Torah recognizes pretty early that sex sells. This is, Alan said at the beginning, this is the most popular story of all the Torah. Well, a certain part of this is all about the sex of it.
I think it's funny that the harlot wears the veil in modesty, but it doesn't mention the other women wearing a veil.
They're
And
different. They're different types of harlots. There's, you know, yes.
But the reference to harlot is she is called a harlot. She is not seeing herself as a harlot. In fact,
True.
So we look at her name, Tamar, which is a very upright tree that grows up, and the canopy is above. So it's undisturbed. It has a clear view of what's going on down below.
Are you talking about a tamarisk tree?
I'm talking about Tamar, which is the palm, the date
Oh,
palm.
it's a different tree then. Okay.
Oh, it's a date palm.
So with
Okay.
her name, Tamar, the date palm, there's an uprightness and an ability to see things that other people can't see because of clutter or, you know, other things going on. She does what she does for a purer reason than anybody else around her is thinking of, according to the story. She's not doing this for self-gain. She won't gain anything, although in the story of how of levirate marriage, it is supposed to protect her and not leave her destitute in her old age, because it would allow children to be born to inherit, but would also somehow guarantee her safety or security. I don't know the exact connection, but there's something about she will gain something by it, but she's not doing it for that. She's doing it for the continuity, that she sees the greater picture of the necessity of continuity in the developing story of our peoplehood. So there's that, but it's others who call her a harlot. And she is definitely acutely aware of the social norms and what they could mean. And yet, when she has an opportunity to publicly shame Judah, she doesn't.
Exactly right.
Right.
And he also, in turn, he does the same thing. This story is about shame and how people decide they're not going to do it.
Right. And the idea of shame is in some ways compared to murder. Like if you smear someone's name, you have in some ways canceled him out of society, because once you do something like that and you publicly shame someone, that doesn't actually go away. That stays associated with the person. This is a very significant story. And as Alan, you know, I was surprised, Alan, you did this quite mildly. And now for something completely different, right?
Right.
It looks like we've changed the story because somebody got confused, but the images in this one story, and knowing later the continuity, you know, to all the way to the house of David, to the kingdom of David, that we have, once we have a story in the Torah, it never goes away. So when twins were first mentioned and twins are mentioned again, that is not because of laziness or lack of imagination. It's very, very purposeful. The idea, and there's something very confusing about tying the ribbon onto the finger of the first and then he gets born after the first one. There's something so crazy about it that we can't just brush it aside.
Mm-hmm.
It takes the idea of firstbornness and says, ha ha ha. What does it mean? Like it doesn't even really mean anything, because Jacob and Esau in their story, who was born first?
Right.
Right? And what did it do to our story? It changed it in a way that by just mentioning a firstborn in the context of a historical period where firstbornness had everything to do with your future. So we've already thrown that one somewhere else.
I agree with you. This primogenitor is taken yet again. I think the Torah is out to break norms, and the norms are through the stories. This is definitely a breaking of the norm.
Well, it's both to create norms and to show that they cannot overrule the things that happen in reality. A norm is a norm. Is it practical? Is it applicable? Does it even mean anything? So that's, I think that's really significant because I miss that actually every other year. I never really noticed this thing of the midwife tied a red ribbon, but somehow in the end of the lines there, it implies that that one with the ribbon came out next. I think
What do you make of the Judah says he's going to burn her versus stone?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
He's going to do the ultimate worst thing, which is smear her name publicly. And what does she do? The exact opposite.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The notes with the altar translation bring up something interesting, that there's also a passage of time in this.
Mm-hmm.
There's enough time for the children that are mentioned to grow up and be old enough to be married. And presumably the trip from wherever they were, where Joseph was sold to the Midianite Ishmaelites, the trip to Egypt, I guess the dissolve crossfade hasn't been invented yet. So they've got a whole trek to go through, and who knows how many stops along the way to sell their wares or things like that. So it could imply that Joseph, who starts out as a 17-year-old, as kind of a naive 17-year-old, has matured now into a wiser young man by the time he gets to Egypt, because that's what we have coming up is what happens to him in Egypt, and we don't really know how long it took to get there and what he went through in that period. And this implies, at least according to this note, this implies a passage of maybe 20 years when you consider the kids being born old enough to be married and have their own children.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. So you're suggesting that this acts as some of the time, this story acts as some of the time bridge in Joseph's story.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. That's good thinking.
Because it's Judah's sons that we're talking about. Judah is Yehuda.
Mm-hmm.
Ring, ring.
Uh-oh, on your phone.
There's also a midrash about, because the brothers interpreted his dream in a negative way, that it took 22 years for the dream to actually come to fruition, for the famine to happen and for them to come to Egypt. It took that 22 years for Joseph to get to his position, which, if you think about it, like Abraham became rich, Jacob became rich, they all became rich, including Joseph. But it took that period of time because the dream was interpreted negatively. It took that length of time for it to come to fruition.
Ruth Ellen?
Yeah, I was just going to say, well, again, because every year we do this, and we have this tendency, we want to take all this chronologically. And this is why I love that Yehuda has a lot of background on the different people, the writers, the unknown JFs, whatever, because this seems plopped down in the middle of this other thing. It's like one of those things. Well, this is going to matter later in the story. We got to get this genealogy in there, and we don't quite know where. And well, we just mentioned Judah with the pit, so let's put it in here, But on the other hand, then the story itself just made me think of the lesson here, just what I talked about earlier, humility, that pride cometh before the fall. Let he without sin cast the first stone, whatever, because Yehuda was so sure that she made a mistake. And the whole idea about shame, I think it goes to the whole idea of prejudice and the fact that when we do not pay attention, we just assume he saw her when she looked like a harlot on the side of the road where he expected to see one. So he just assumed she was. If he had taken any time to look closer, it's hard to imagine that he couldn't, recognize who she was. So you should be careful. You need to be attentive to people, and maybe some people are deserving of shame. But if the wrong people are shamed and it stays with them, then it smears their reputation forever. And we're seeing that play out too. When you mentioned shame, I'm just thinking about it again online. Remember what got rid of McCarthy? The final thing on the McCarthy thing was when the other congressman said, "Sir, have you no shame?"
Welch.
There's
said that.
there's a place in civil society for some reference point of what is beyond the pale in terms of how it affects the whole, and we have then we constantly have this to bring it to modern times, this yin and yang between individual liberty and and choice. And then the other thing also is to have a civil society and the rules that were there, and we still carry some of them with us, and we try to change them as we go along when they don't fit, but they were there because they worked for a reason. There was what happens when a son dies without providing for the family. This plays out again. This is the first case, and we're going to see it again with Ruth and Boaz when her husband dies. So I like this part of the story that it shows the female agency. Like, and the next time we get that story is the daughters who had no male issue or whatever, and Moshe agreed that they should get a share. I'm mixing up these stories, but now it's after doing it so many years, now I see where all this line comes. So to end up doing what's right, you do what's right is not always going to follow the norms and the traditions that came before. But to just throw out those norms can also lead to unintended consequences and chaos. And as far as that's a lesson for us today, we see that happening again.
But at the risk of incurring Arnie's wrath, you mentioned shame, and we found all of these lessons or all of these potential lessons in this passage, and yet, and maybe I can attribute this to our Christian neighbors, I think the lesson that most kids are taught about this particular portion is onanism, that masturbation is bad and God will kill you.
Where's the blind come in?
But and I think that all of these other things I think have been ignored in many readings of this portion of the Torah, and focus on that as this is a don't do this lesson rather than all of the issues that we've talked about now in the last few minutes.
And that's always the danger of the reading the sources, in this case scriptures, in order to justify your pre-existing opinion. Mm-hmm. And I think that our wonderful tradition that there is no such thing as reading once and coming to an understanding, but read it again and again and again and again. It is the best hedge to prevent you from being able to come to a point and say, this is what it means now and always. Because that feels dangerous, because that feels like that's the opposite of what we are instructed to do. Turn it this way, turn it that way. Mm-hmm. Write it and study it in your whole lifetime. It's very, very clear that there's an injunction against coming to conclusions or justifying conclusions you've reached in advance.
They didn't have the media we have now. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Ruth Ellen.
No. Well, I'm just going to, because I said it, and now, but maybe to put a happier note on it, to Yehuda's point, and maybe why later on it's the house of Judah that went for it, because even I talked about the shame because he didn't pay attention, but when the denouement comes and he finds out who it is, he does, in fact, he doesn't give all the details, but he takes responsibility for it. And so then there is forgiveness out of that. So it's like hope springs eternal then. You can make mistakes, but if you're willing to own up to them, you can have some kind of forgiveness from other humans and redemption from Hashem.
Arnie? I was just going to mention the impact of shame over the ages. I mean, it had a certain impact then, but now I look at Trump. I mean, from the very beginning, years and years ago, when he made fun of that disabled reporter and like that, I mean, and the continuous barrage of horrible things that have come out of his mouth, it seems like it's ignored. I mean, it has no impact anymore. And it wasn't too long ago when just having an affair like who was that guy? Hart had that affair.
Gary Hart.
Yeah,
Very
that
hard.
it ruined his political career. But
Yeah.
then we're seeing pictures of Trump at Jeffrey Epstein's
John
and
Edwards,
everything
too.
else. Nothing, you know. So it's very curious to me how the mores, folkways, whatever you want to call it, could shift so quickly. And it doesn't
It's
take millennia.
Arnie, it's social psychosis.
But you know, they're not necessarily shifting because guess what? Today, last year, next year, we're still going to read the same thing about shame. You know, and it's still the words haven't changed. So you know, even if the society either reflects or does not reflect the wisdoms that are in these words, we get the opportunity as a group, and that by a group, I don't mean the group that's here in this particular session. It's the group of the world that studies this every single week, because it's a large, we are not the only people studying this today.
So this is a little esoteric. I'll try to keep it to 1.5 minutes. Sorry, Arnie. But some things don't change. In our tradition, the repetition of studying over and over and over confirmed that some things don't change. In this story we're reading today, we have an example of reaching rock bottom. If Joseph in the bottom of the waterless cistern is not an example of reaching rock bottom, I don't know what is. And
That's right.
We think of the concept of hope welling up, an image from a well, that hope springs eternal. We use this terminology, right? And when we blessedly get to, in this parashah, read enough of Joseph's story to know that it hasn't come to an end and good things can potentially happen. The concept of hope in Judaism is probably, I'm going to say the most, but let's just moderate and say one of the most important concepts. And it really does tie into this idea that things you have done do not condemn you for a lifetime. But when an entire society accepts things that were done that were immoral or amoral, that is rock bottom. And from that rock bottom, we only have one direction to go. And so, yes, it feels very confounding to feel like amorality is normalized. But I want to say I'm too much of a Jew and an Israeli to not understand that the word tikva, hope, we wouldn't be here having this discussion as Jews. We wouldn't even exist if it wasn't for the concept of hope. So I hold on to that, and I see a really good story in what is happening in Australia right now, where people have said, wait a minute, we don't have to take this. We're humans. We are allowed to say we are humans, and our humanity entails certain things, and we're responsible for them. We can't just be lazy. I don't know. I don't know why I'm feeling hopeful, but maybe because that's the ultimate thing that we have. In all of our history, this is the only thing that we can say for sure has gotten us to the place where we can sit here today studying together. It's hope. So you got it. I guess there's a bottom of a pit, and maybe we're at the bottom of a pit right now.
You're saying you're discomfited, just like Jacob.
I'm discomfited every day. And
Right.
I'd love
So
to
that's
say just like Jacob.
eternal in you.
Sure. Okay. Anyhow, that was my rant.
I think men have always gotten away with sexual misbehavior much more than women. I mean, women have always been persecuted for stepping out of bounds, whereas men just seem to be able to do it and get away with it pretty much. I mean, there was for a while the Me Too movement, but that seems to be over with, and that was short-lived. So I'm not at all surprised at any of it, actually.
But and maybe that's why there's a metaphor for the whole idea of brute force throughout humanity. And earlier on, men could do this because they could overshadow women by brute force. They still can. But now all the stories of counteracting that, and even the women in the Bible, they use their cunning. I'll say that in a good way. They use their brains. And we could say that the evolution of human beings, the way they use their brains. Now, one thing, that's what I read that the anthropological genealogists are saying now. One of the primary factors in evolution that allowed Homo sapiens to prevail was the idea of community, that they could not do everything alone. And this is when we go back to our base instincts, and we can go back to about how the brain works. We have the primitive brain, and then all this other stuff on top of it that was added on. And it's like this war within us, like George Jacob, the struggle between giving into our base instincts, even when as low as Yehuda said, why at that moment he had been married, why at that moment he felt that he had to have carnal knowledge of that woman because she looked pretty, why he could have stopped and thought at a higher level, but that didn't happen, so and Sodom and Gomorrah, all that stuff, the fact that we need the laws, the fact that Craig had a career, but it's because it's this constant, every moment decision to take the higher ground, so to speak, which one could say is the one's hopeful that can overcome the base instincts, because you don't want to blame people necessarily because there's part of their nature, but all about living and growing is to overcome your nature when you were born. Which brings me to the one last point to bring up the whole idea of our Lador Vador, and we want to carry these things on. But when do we go through these cycles where shame, for instance, hits rock bottom? Is because we're tweaking, and then people say, well, people shouldn't be shamed because they have a proclivity to want to love somebody of the same sex or whatever, But my whole thing about that, about homosexuality becoming more quote unquote acceptable to the whole, is because thousands of years ago, most children didn't live past infancy. It was more imperative that people were able to procreate. And then when that got loosened up and the population was big enough, you could be open to more options for other reasons. I'm sorry, that was an aside I shouldn't have taken there. But every generation is born and then has to, the generation gap thing, they have to learn again for themselves. So that we're constantly on this cycle, up and down. We go on the slippery slope, and then it seems like we're constraining individual freedom too much, and we let loose, and then all of a sudden we've let loose the floodgates, and we're back to the bottom again. So it's like, I guess the hope is, are we going to inch up in terms of that moral arc that Martin Luther King talked about, and that every year when we read this, we're going to actually learn a little more and behave accordingly better? Or is it just going to be constantly this sine wave up and down?
But
That's
Ruth
what keeps
Ellen,
me up at night.
We're sitting here and we're saying, oh, she used her wiles and she didn't do, she would not have had to do any of that had he done the right thing in the first place. I mean, why are we congratulating her for being, witty? Why aren't we saying?
Well, I'm just saying to look at both.
You. I'm not saying you. I'm not
I
saying
know, but
you.
to look at both things. Well, I'm
saying,
again.
Why are we not focusing on the fact that he did not do the right thing by her in the first place?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm saying. Why are we so focused on, how she went about getting what she needed, and she had to play the harlot and be
we aren't. That's what we're saying. But we're asking, why was the story presented in this way? For her to have to be deceptive because he didn't do the right thing, and then
but we're saying, look how smart she was for being deceptive. Look at the way she didn't lash back and do the same thing. And I'm saying,
right.
Yeah, I'm saying, he didn't do the right thing.
Well, but part of what I'm saying is, even though by brute force he could have taken her, and we're talking, this came all to my mind when you said that over the history, men have tended to get away with this stuff.
And they still do. And so if we're studying Torah and we're applying it somehow to today's world, this is the way that we need to apply it. That, what Craig said, or I don't know who said it, I think Craig, Was it you, Craig, who was talking about Trump getting away with, or the Epstein
I think it
thing?
was
Was it?
Arnie.
Arnie, yeah.
It was Arnie. Okay. It was Arnie. So, that whole thing is just apropos of what we're reading now.
I would just say the whole pattern was started with in the Garden of Eden section in Breshit, where when called upon to say, "What have you done?" Adam said it was her fault.
It was her fault.
Not only that, it was your fault, God, for putting that woman here, and so that I would get in trouble because of what the woman made me do. So the pattern is right there.
Very
the blame,
good, Alan.
the
But all I
blame
was
from the
trying
very
to
beginning.
say is vis-a-vis the idea that there's always hope, is then when we look closer at these stories, there's an antidote. There's always, if again, it's what we put our attention on. If we only want to keep looking at the caveman who brings down women from the viewpoint of we post quote unquote women's livers, well, even in the last century, I mean, I just watched the thing about Phyllis Schlafly. Again, in those big jumps I'm talking about, they're the little reverberations of the sine wave up and down all the way along. And I do feel like we're all into this right now, and we're not supposed to get political, but it matters. If we're close to that rock bottom, and it might be the first time in our collective lives of the people here who happen to be born, post World War II in America, we have a different, I would say, great gratitude, or mostly in America, compared to the rest of the world, have a way to look at this stuff. And it hurts because we feel, I think, correct me if people don't agree, but I agree to disagree, that we feel like we're at one of those really low bottoms. And that's what's got us all palpitating our hearts. Okay. Sorry.
You have your hand up.
Just going by order of presentation of lines here. And, I mentioned that I thought that it's significant that Judah married Shua and then they did the sexual acts. In this case, Shua died and Judah was consoled. And immediately after this, he lay with a harlot. He didn't. And I don't know that was a dishonorable thing at that particular time. He had lost his wife. We're not hearing that he's overly promiscuous in any way. It's just the order of presentation doesn't say that. So.
What if a woman would have done that?
Yeah, right.
But it's a time and place.
Oh, it's still a time and place, Yehuda.
You can take today's mores and assign them to something from 1,000 years ago.
Well,
So what could be some examples of why the concept of a father choosing a wife for his son, where could this go wrong?
Well, it matters if you're a Hindu or not.
It matters what your purpose for choosing a wife for your son is.
Right. Well, usually it was never about anything other than getting the line forward.
Right. So, okay. So if we think of some modern examples, think of monarchy in Europe. The idea of choosing a wife for a son was not for the continuity of a line of people who carry a covenant, but for wealth, dominance, and power. So I think we have to separate and say we are reading the story of our people as the ones preparing to be in a covenant separately. And so when we read that Yehuda chose a wife for his son, we have to read it in that context. This story is written down as a chronicle of leading to a covenant and what that covenant means in society. And by the way, the story of the covenant is written from the viewpoint of the Israelites, Bnei Israel. But it's not for Bnei Israel solely. That's the thing about Judaism, that you have to take that beginning and put it with an ending that says for all mankind. Because without that, it becomes a very, very skewed story. So in the context of saying a covenant is made by God and a people in order to, by example, show what a covenantal society is. Because we're talking about, in the end, covenantal society, not just a covenant between an individual and a deity. And we expand that. We say, in the context of why the story is written, we have to look at that and say, Tamar was not chosen by Yehudah as the wife of his son in order to gain lands, in order to any of the, it's for the continuity that will lead. And then we know this because we know from study that the line of Tamar will lead later in our story to other
So you're
things.
suggesting that he chose her, and she is saying, well, I'm just doing what you wanted me to do.
Right. So when her husband dies, and the laws at the time said, well, the brother will become your husband, and the brother, and then the next brother, and the next brother, until a brother says, I'd rather throw my seed on the ground than, continue this thing that is, the tradition I was born into. That's the story. That's the story we're supposed to carry forward, because don't forget, this is a mere interlude before we continue reading, because why was this stuck here right in the middle? There's an understanding of a greater story. And this is going to lead us back to Joseph. And I recommend that we keep reading. And I'm going to ask Vic to read if you would like. And this is kind of tough because it's kind of long, but kind of not. So let's do, if you have the breath all the way 1 through 23. So 39, 1 through 23.
Did somebody decide to read?
Yeah, I think I asked Vic, but I don't know if he's
Oh,
muted.
Vic,
I can't
okay.
see.
Because if he's not ready, I will. Okay.
All right, Vic's ready.
When Joseph was taken down to Egypt, a certain Egyptian, Potiphar, a courier of Pharaoh and his chief steward, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man, and he stayed in the house of the Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord lent success to everything he undertook, he took a liking to Joseph and made him personal attendant and put him in charge of the household, placing in his hands all that he owned. And from the time that the Egyptian put him in charge of his household and all that he owned, the Lord blessed his house for Joseph's sake, so that the blessing of the Lord was upon everything that he owned in the house and outside. He left all that he had in Joseph's hands, and with him there, he paid attention to nothing save the food that he ate. Now Joseph was well built and handsome. After a time, his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph and said, lie with me. But he refused. He said, his master's wife, look, with me here, my master gives no thought to anything in this house, and all that he owns he has placed in my hands. He wields no more authority in this house than I, and he has withheld nothing from me except since you are his wife. How then could I do this most wicked thing and sin before God? And much as she coaxed Joseph that day after day, he did not yield to her request and lie beside her, to be with her. One such day he came into the house to do his work, none of the household being there inside. She caught hold of him by his garment and said, lie with me. But he left his garment in her hand and got away and fled outside. When she saw that he had left it in her hand and fled outside, she called out to her servants and said to them, look, he had to bring us a Hebrew to dally with. This one came to lie with me, but I screamed loud. And when he heard me screaming at the top of my voice, he left his garment with me and got away and fled outside. She kept his garment beside her until his master came home. Then she told him the same story, saying, the Hebrew slave whom you brought to our house came to me and to dally with. But when I screamed at the top of my voice, he left the garment with me and fled outside. When his master heard the story that his wife told him, namely, thus and so your slave did to me, he was furious. So Joseph's master had him put in prison, where the king's prisoners were confined. But even while he was there in prison, the Lord was with Joseph. He extended kindness to him and disposed the chief jailer favorably to him. The chief jailer put Joseph's in charge of all the prisoners who were in that prison. And he was the one to carry out everything that was done there. The chief jailer did not supervise anything that was in Joseph's charge because the Lord was with him. And whatever he did, the Lord made successful.
All right. The Lord was with him is 3 times mentioned in these 23 lines that Vic just read. First in line 2, where he says that Joseph was brought down to Egypt, etc., etc. Line 2, Vayehi Adonai et Yosef. This word, Vayehi Adonai et Yosef. Okay, the Lord was with Joseph. Again, Alan, since you're so kind, line 21. I love this effect. It's so calming. Okay, line 21. Vayehi Adonai et Yosef. The Lord was with Joseph. This time, when he's in jail. And this is no regular jail. This is a special jail, not for like little criminals, but for people who've done something against the king. Okay, and then this ends with, I didn't mark it, but it's the very end of what we just read. Ba'asher Adonai ito. It says, the chief jailer did not supervise anything that was in Joseph's charge because Adonai ito, the Lord was with them. And whatever he did, the Lord made successful. So here we have a very important relationship. He is not forsaken. Clearly not forsaken. But he also understands this. That's the connection. It's surely mentioned enough times. Surely Joseph got that message. But he clearly, A, is not forsaken, and B, he knows he's not forsaken.
Yeah.
What a great thread in the story of, leading to the actual choosing a people for a covenant in a formal way.
Especially since in the previous sections of this parashah, God isn't mentioned at all.
Yeah.
It's all about the interactions within the family and what they're doing either to or for one another, but not any divine guidance or divine intervention on their behalf.
But again, we see this multicolored, I don't know the multicolored coat, but evidently it's a special coat given to him that to me represents that he does have these added attributes, that he can live in the world and not be of it. No matter what happens, he can rise above things. And his brothers, I think, did not have that attribute. Or at least to that degree. Just one thing after another, he overcomes everything that's thrown at him in the world. He's able to rise above it and continue on, knowing that Hashem will always give him a way to escape. It's a beautiful thing. It's a very beautiful thing to be able to, if you could really believe that and live that way. Wow.
I would note that
Very powerful.
the strength of the Hebrew here, the reference to God is Jehovah, or Yahweh, or whatever. And that is the strongest name of God that's in the Torah. So this is, it's definitely, there's an imprimatur here with the Hebrew.
Very good. Yeah.
Ruth Ellen?
Yeah, I'm just going to bring up what Yehuda said at the very beginning, that we have to that Yosef always said that it was God. He was doing God's will. So all of a sudden, sitting like, we don't hear a lot about his inner turmoil. Maybe the gift was he is the closest thing to a prophet in what we think of a prophet. That we don't hear about him directly having an encounter with Hashem like like Abraham and Jacob did, and even Rivka. But he didn't need it because it was with him at birth.
Right.
That's what's hitting me now. And so then the crazy thing is, already there's a reference in the very next chapter about Tamar and Yehuda, because Potiphar did the same thing. His ego said, "Oh, look, oh, he did this, throw him in jail. It's wrong. We all know it's wrong. It's not fair." But the thing is, if he hadn't done that, and maybe that's why Joseph didn't fight it, this is all part of the plan, because if he hadn't gone to jail, he wouldn't have been brought to the Pharaoh about the dream. So again, it's that yin and yang about human decision making and not looking at the whole picture or letting their ego get in the way. And yet there was this narrative of what was destined to be. And if everything went according to our justice alone, none of that would have happened. So that's where the faith has to come in, I guess, and the idea of energies, whatever you call that energy, beyond our own human motivations, has a role in how life turns out for everybody.
That's true.
Funny how being thrown in jail is a good thing.
Yeah, I always thought so.
I mean, he must, it's not as terrible if you know that it's part of the process.
Right.
Craig?
But
This is a matter of faith that he knew. He had that dream and he told his brothers they would bow to him. Well, they didn't bow to him yet. So he must have known that there's something more.
Vic, were you trying to say something? I'm sorry, I had my cursor on the wrong place.
it's all right. But
No, if it refers directly to what they're saying before I move on to Craig, because the subject might change.
yeah, just being in jail being a good thing. He's got the system in his favor.
What does that mean?
Well, he's still largely in control of a lot of things, and he can manipulate the way things go.
I see what you say.
When you say that, it makes me think that since nobody knows what's in somebody else's mind, that he's making up dreams, maybe? Are you implying that there's that aspect? Or am I just going somewhere?
If he did, that would be a really smart move.
All right.
But really quickly to that before, I was just going to say that maybe thing is, whoever said this applies here. You can do whatever you want to move forward as long as you don't care who gets the credits. And this is like the slave to the king. Like he said, Joseph, in the lowliest position one could imagine, has more control than is apparent to the eye. And that means people aren't looking so closely either. So that has validity.
You know what you just said, Ruth Ellen? That was my strategy as a teacher. I did not care to get credit for anything I did. I just had goals in mind. And however I got to those goals, didn't matter if I got the credit because the goals were the most important thing.
You just have to wonder about the wisdom of him telling the original story of his dreams to his brothers. He had to know that would have antagonized him, and if he hadn't mentioned it, it still would have been meaningful to him, but he wouldn't have gotten into all that trouble. Just think about it. If I told that dream to my brother, growing up, told him he was going to be bowing in front of me and all this stuff, it would have started a fist fight.
Sorry.
We already forgot. Didn't we just read that he told his father and his father said, "Go tell your brothers"? Is that not true? And that's going to the point of Jacob's point of view and character, because then when the next one included him, that's when he got upset. Am I wrong about that? So
no.
It's just a little. So
I think you're right.
Right.
So Joseph didn't necessarily go counterintuitive to your point, Arnie, until his father told him. And there again, he says, my husband said, I feel like I'm divinely guided. Joseph was quiet. That's what I'm realizing. We don't have it written out, but he was divinely guided. And that's why when we look back at this on the face of it, a lot of it doesn't make sense until we see, but now we know in hindsight, the whole redemption, the whole thing, sojourn to Egypt, and everything that came after, there was our big long thread. It could not have happened without these events, or at
Let's hear
least
some other voices. Arnie, if I want to call him Craig, but I have a feeling Craig is going to say something a little different. So Arnie, say something, and then Craig, we're going to give him the floor.
I already said what I wanted to say.
Oh, okay. I thought I heard your voice in between there. Okay, Craig.
All this prophecy.
Joseph obviously made some mistakes, including why didn't he get a lawyer? I mean, where was the trial? Where was any due process? But you got to give him credit for making the best out of a bad situation. And it's already been brought up this morning about the Me Too movement. And I've lived through a lot of developments in the criminal justice system. And for a while there was this saying, believe the woman, always believe the woman, which in my legal mind, no, don't always believe anybody. But for a while, it was believe the woman, what she says. And yet right here in the Torah, we have a false rape accusation made, and it's to cover up her own misconduct and try to appease her spouse. So it's just interesting from my perspective, these points.
Good point.
I think it's kind of interesting and maybe a little groundbreaking that here we have an incident that is inspired by sexual desire, but it's the woman's sexual desire that's driving it, not the man, who is usually the domineering character and pushing himself on a woman. Here it's the woman who is driving the initial part, at least.
But I'm not sure it's for her sexual desire more than her security.
Right.
Oh, really?
No.
We just, the line just before it is, he's so good looking.
Right. It's,
Okay.
Yeah.
All
How
right.
could,
lust. It shows the women can be lustful too.
Yeah, and that's another first for the Torah.
Point well taken.
It's worth reminding us that most of the stories about sexual advances that are unwanted are not about desire, they're about domination.
Right. In this case, Potiphar's wife was the dominatrix.
So are you saying that if he hadn't been so handsome, she wouldn't have sought that security?
We don't know. Aviva's suggesting it's a power dynamic that she's taken advantage of.
I see.
She liked his Yiddish cup too.
well, that's a point I think, Craig, worth going into a little bit, because it's almost the first example of an anti-Semitic comment, where it's not just he brought this handsome slave into our house, it's he brought this Hebrew into our house. Why does the Torah have her making that particular description? Because it becomes pejorative coming out of her mouth.
Yeah.
I was also thinking about the idea of, fan fiction, how this, like what they did with the red tent, how young he was, because more than likely, Potiphar's wife was much younger than Potiphar, and she probably had stronger urges and whatever, and she wasn't betrothed to him for love, or so she had this youthful vigor that her husband could no longer, and here she sees this young handsome guy right there. So then she uses the power that she has over him, and I think it may be more of her as an more immature woman trying to appease her physical needs, but
or
so
maybe it was
just
the
power
fact. Maybe it was the fact that he was circumcised and she was curious.
Is that too? But in the times that we have a repetition of a story, we have the narration, and then we have somebody repeating the story in their own words. So in the story, without Potiphar's repetition, it says Joseph happened to be fair of form and fair of appearance, and after all this, his master's wife set her sights on Joseph and said, "Lie with me." So already there was a recognition of Joseph's specialness to even be allowed into that kind of company. But he refused, saying to his master's wife, "Look, my master gives no thought to what is in this house. All that he owns, he has put into my hands." Now, when she repeats the story in her own words, she uses the term Hebrew slave. Okay? Now, in my commentary, it suggests that it's the slave part that's important. Hebrew at that time did not necessarily mean Israelite. Hebrew could have, just from the nature of the word, and with Hebrew not having capital letters, it just means someone from somewhere else. Me'ever, from the other side. Ivri is someone from the other side. So it doesn't necessarily have the weight of all that, but there's a recognition. Potiphar sees somebody getting power in her own house. It's not cool. She wants the power. So what does she do? She tries to dominate over, right? And she strips him of what? The one thing that distinguishes him, his coat with the stripes. Or not. Maybe it's a different coat at this time. But again, this thread of threads, for lack of imagination, is again what you wear on the outside that may define you. And when people see you that way, if you can take that covering away, you've taken the essence of the person away. In Potiphar's wife's mind, she's taking away, she's not just burying him, because maybe nudity was not shameful in those times. We don't know. It's long before,
It's hot. It's hot there.
Yeah, right. But she's
know.
taking away how he's identified. She's taking away his identity. Because
Yeah.
from this story that a lot of his identity starts with this idea of.
Right. She doesn't refer to him by name. She refers to him by Hebrew.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which means that she is using him as a slave. But in this case, she wanted him as a sex slave. It just didn't work out.
Interesting that you mentioned the garment, though, too, because later when we get the story of Moshe, when he's in the cast on the Nile in the basket, when they discover him, they recognize the cloth that he's wrapped in as identifying as coming from a Hebrew household.
Right.
And so
You're suggesting that's the first reference to a talit?
Well, it's interesting because we don't really know whether it's that or whether they had distinguishing, fabrics or patterns from area to area. Like, that the kind of houndstooth that we see on the Palestinians or other Arabs in the region, it's specific. I mean, I had a render houndstooth when I was in art school, a fair amount, and it's a pain. And this is a houndstooth, but it's a little different. And I just, so I noticed it, and I was surprised to see it coming from that area and wonder how far back that went. It's interesting, with my background, to notice the changes in the actual fabric detail. So it could have been that it's referring to the talit, but it could also be that it's not, that it's referring to just something that's specific about the fabric in that region.
Well, first and foremost, in the context of the time, trade routes were how people got around and found out what was going on in other places.
Right.
Yeah.
I think each culture had their own traditions of weaving and the styles and patterns they probably put in it, just like the Native American cultures all have different, weaving styles, and you could distinguish, Navajo rugs from Apache rugs and things like that. And, we might not recognize them, but people back then would recognize each other's.
Right, but that's what I'm saying is that there's a difference between that and a garment that's identified as a religious garment, like a talit.
Right.
Well, I think maybe that was a half joke, but remember in the arts, that modern artist made it look like a talit, like that his cloak was a talit, because obviously that came later too. So I think the idea is I was thinking of the Scottish color, the kilts,
Right.
Yeah,
each
the
have their own.
tartans. Yeah.
That's that I think maybe that derived out of people be able to identify friend or foe from far away, So
Sure.
yeah, that's
Sure. That's it.
yeah.
But I did, just to come back to the wording in the Torah. It was sort of chilling to see that line where it said this Hebrew, it just comes off as pejorative.
Yeah.
But maybe that's because of the generations of history that we have since then. That at that time, as you point out, Aviva, the meaning of the literal meaning of the word is somebody from the other side, not necessarily somebody bad from the other side.
But to support what you're saying, it is that distinctiveness of the people that become the true, because by now we can call them Bnei Israel, right? We have the concept of the children of the one who struggles. By now we have that concept, and what distinguishes the Israelites throughout the rest of our stories is something. What that something is not clearly understood by others, but they recognize that there is that something. And that's why I think that the three mentions of that God was with Joseph is very relevant to what you're saying, because eventually that does become the source of anti-Semitism, that the others, the non-Israelites, thought that the Israelites got special status by the God they wanted to believe in, and it really got in their way. And in order for them to have that belief in God, they had to eliminate the Israelites out of it, because there was a relationship thing that kind of got in the way. So it's I never looked at it that way because I read it in the Hebrew, but when you say it, and when you see it capitalized in English, it gives it a different context. And yes, the anti-Semitism, the source of anti-Semitism to me does go back to that idea that in Judaism, ideally, and I feel very strange saying in this day and age, in light of what's going on in the country, the land, Israel, to say that the relationship and the covenant is expected to be carried forth by a particular group of people, but is not unique to that group of people. They just have to bear it on their backs for all to remember. And so it's very difficult, but this, the beginning of the relationship, and that's why I love the idea that, who is the patriarchy and matriarchy, and what qualities are they? And they have to do with steadfastness. So, correct.
Okay, here's where I need your help, because to Alan's point, and this first instance of anti-Semitism, and it was said, well, maybe we're using that in the modern context, but did the authors, divinely inspired, anticipate that anti-Semitism would come? And this is the warning that it was going to be happening, because he knew what we would be experiencing now, and probably what is going to be happening in the future, which is accelerating, etc. So I am also struck by that. Hey, there's a Hebrew in our house, and maybe that is foretelling. So back to my question: who do we think wrote this? Was it divinely inspired, or who wrote this?
I'm never going to give you an answer to that. I can tell you that I can't look at something written and studied in a way that doesn't imply humans had a hand in it. I mean, I just personally have never been able to make that leap and say divinely written by the finger of God or whatever. That's my personal problem, but I see the commonality of the thread, and why in some ways it's comforting and easier to think divinely inspired, because you don't have to have all this discussion. You can just say, well, it says so and it was told to us by God. I just find that not acceptable to me personally. I need to know that people struggled and said, this story explains it, so let's keep this one while we're editing. Because in Hebrew, you don't have. Let's just look. I'm sorry, Ruth. I'll call you in a minute, and you. But let's just look at this first word of this parashah, Vayeishev, and it says, "And Joseph sat in the land of his fathers." However, we don't know if it says Vayeishev or Vayashav, which could mean he returned to the land of his fathers. In the same way that we look at the very first word in Genesis, Bereshit, we read it, we're used to saying in the beginning, but there's no indication in Hebrew that it doesn't mean in a beginning. And that changes it significantly. It takes it from the specific to the universal.
Aviva, is that a terminology that it is commonly used or familiar in a beginning?
I heard it for the first time with the first visiting rabbi for the holidays that we had when we moved here 21 years ago.
Laura Duhan.
Right. Laura Duhan Kaplan. And I thought it was fascinating, and it really made me understand the Hebrew with its lack of indication of pronunciation and lack of punctuation is not laziness or omission. So
yeah, I hear you.
So did that help, Craig, or did I just scramble everything?
Well, if you'd say probably the politically correct one, what I suppose works for me is that whether it was man or God or woman, we're all created in God's image. So it's divinely inspired. And for whatever reason, we dwell on each word as if it was written by somebody more important than just some author.
And that's the importance, exactly. I just want to say, Craig, you hit at where I find the comfort I need, is that it always puts us as humans in a place of understanding that there's something greater than us. In Judaism, we have a name for it. We have a concept for it. We have a common understanding. But for all people, if any person or group of people puts themselves above others in some place that belongs to not a human entity, it's only led to dangerous things.
Right,
So
but
as
the
humans,
one thing we do put above others is the Torah, right? And so that's why we're here today. We're trying to gain wisdom, and I'm just wondering what the source is. But I know there's no easy answer, but it was handed down to us for some reason, so it feels a little godlike and a little mystical.
yes, and we have to keep it in that realm lest we take credit, right? That's the thing. That's the relationship.
I would make a distinction that it's not the Torah, it's the study of.
Exactly.
It's the active part. It's not the inanimate object.
And I'd like to take the position that it's not necessarily the writing or the studying, but the doing. When we perform mitzvot, that's the fulfillment, and everything else just is, the gravy. Well,
there is the
it reinforces what we're doing. It's reinforcement. It's great to have knowledge, but unless you're out there doing the mitzvot, you're not fulfilling what you
reading
need
Torah
to do.
is a mitzvah and is a doing. And it's the first prayer we say before we do the session every time.
But why, Yehuda? Why do you think that reading it is so important? I mean,
I think
it's the understanding.
Shape our approach to life. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I agree. But I say that's the beginning. Look at the continuum. You learn to read, you learn to speak, you learn. All these are steps towards performing the mitzvah. That's the final thing. You got to get out there and do it.
I agree.
I agree too, and stick with us all the way to Nitzavim, so you can see where it all falls. Well, the dominoes fall into place for me. So Ruth Ellen, and then Sarah, and then Yehuda.
I had an epiphany, so I had to raise my hand. I'm just going to take one brief commercial because we're all doing this. I don't like it. I jumped in a few times because this is the problem. We're all very into this, which is wonderful. And the thing is, when we go off on another tangent, we're afraid that we have something to say about the last episode. And I think Arnie was agreeing to this. So maybe we have to, on another note, tweak that a little. But my apologies to the degrees that I jumped in more. But now that Arnie has said all that, I have to throw in one thing. Why? Is we're the people of the word. And Craig, we're the people of the word. That's why what gets us in trouble is whether it was divinely imprinted or it was human beings who put their attention and presence on this. This was they put their attention on this. They didn't make assumptions, and they sat in a cave and they thought about this over and over again. So over millennia, whether it was some divine inspiration of a higher energy field, whatever you want to call it, came to the realization that we have to keep paying attention to what will call to our higher angels. I'm using all these aphorisms, but they work, from our base instincts to allow civilization to have proceed. And that brings me in, and so we shall keep them for frontlets between thy eyes. I shall teach it to our children, because our children come into this world like young, raised by wolves, wouldn't know what the heck to do without guidance, and still have to go as they become adults and make their own way, and then reassess everything they learned and see whether it serves them or not. But if we're going to succeed as a species, as a civilization, to move forward, we have to have a common language and agree on some things. So that's why we are the people of the word and the book and the law. The trouble is, when people look at it and they say it's only this way, my way or the highway, they're not looking for all these subtleties that we get into. And I know where Craig is coming from, because I thought that all the time before. If people want to say this is the way it is, and this is what the Lord, the great consciousness said, well, we don't even have a direct line, and we're telling people you should think this way because I read a translation of a translation of a translation where we have
Slow
this whole
down,
break in
slow
the story.
down. You get so worked up, but the speed gets more than I can process.
I know, because I don't think the percent. But so then my epiphany was about anti-Semitism and the word read or whatever. It goes back to our constant theme about that we're all brothers, and we let ego and pride and fear get in the way, because where's anti-Semitism? We're still looking within the quote unquote Abrahamic traditions. When we think back over history, who abused the Jews, it wasn't the Chinese, it wasn't the Hindus, it wasn't the Buddhists. This is the between the Muslims, the Christians, and the Jews. Well, who is our father's favorite? They all claim to come from Abraham, but then they all see it differently. And so this is like maybe the children who didn't get the birthright because I thought that was something special instead of being a big
You're really
responsibility.
digressing, Ruth Ellen.
I'm sorry. But yes and no, because okay.
Sarah and then Yuda. Oh, you're muted, Sarah.
Okay, sorry. Well, I think mitzvahs are extremely important. I don't think it's enough because we all fall short of doing them all. And so I think that we go back to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and the idea of faith that something greater, whatever that is, we call it Hashem, is in charge. And that's why I like the mystical part, the Kabbalistic part, and I'm very grateful that that was thought of and brought out by a bunch of guys in a cave. Because I think that the mystical part, along with the mitzvahs, working together, gives us the whole picture. That something is unfolding here. There's still a story unfolding that just, I believe, happens to be with the Jewish people. And That's all I have to say.
Yuda, go ahead.
I want to go back to the text. The whole I think there's this progression that takes place here that starts basically in the prison. And in the prison, the two people that, the anonymous nature of not giving the Hebrew a name goes directly to not giving the cupbearer, or the bread baker a name. And, or Jean Valjean in Les Mis. When you take people's actual identity away and you give them a number like the Nazis did, stamping on your wrist, you dehumanize people.
Right.
And there's a dehumanization that's taking place here. It's not just that it's anti-Semitic. It's dehumanizing completely. And it's just up front slapping us in the face with this particular young, because there's the power dynamics taking place, and it's taking place in such a way that the person who has got the power is dehumanizing someone beneath them. So therefore, there's no respect and everything else that goes with it.
And just to be clear what I was saying, even with Joseph being in jail and all these things, what was the mitzvah that he was doing? He took care of the king's business and ended up in jail because of his wife for being in that position. So what got him out of jail? Was it mitzvahs?
It was him trusting that he would be able to tap whatever he understood about a dream.
Exactly.
And it doesn't even mean that he had the power.
Exactly.
To interpret dreams. It does not mean that at all. It's rather, from his standpoint,
it's mystical, right? It's mystical.
Trusted that God was with him, and therefore
exactly
right.
Exactly.
Pretty simple, actually.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring that point up because I think it's extremely important. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Yehuda.
So we're jumping ahead, but we kind of know the story. We know the dreams. We know why he comes out of jail to interpret the Pharaoh's dreams. But what does
I think you should actually read that thing and finish this portion and keep the conversation going after that.
Okay, I'm just going to finish my sentence, and then we're going to do it. What does Pharaoh do with that information? Does he use it to gain more for himself, or does he use it to ensure that his people do not die of starvation? This is a very important concept because we're going to start playing with the idea of Pharaoh and the God of the Israelites, and there being some sort of greater understanding there that supersedes his plain ability to wield power over a lot of people. So I want to keep that in mind as we read the next chapter for whatever it's worth.
Right. What a great piece. And don't assume that we all know what's going to happen next.
Right. Could have changed. Somebody could have changed the words on us. Okay, up for whoever can unmute first and read.
I can do it. Sure. Sometime later, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt gave offense to their lord, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his two courtiers, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and put them in custody in the house of the chief steward, in the same prison house where Joseph was confined. The chief steward assigned Joseph to them, and he attended them. When they had been in custody for some time, both of them, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in the prison, dreamed in the same night, each his own dream, and each dream with its own meaning. When Joseph came to them in the morning, he saw that they were distraught. He asked Pharaoh's courtiers who were with him in custody in his master's house, saying, "Why do you appear downcast today?" And they said to him, "We had dreams, and there is no one to interpret them." So Joseph said to them, "Surely God can interpret. Tell me your dreams." Then the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph. He said to him, "In my dream, there was a vine in front of me. On the vine were 3 branches. It had barely budded when out came its blossoms, and its clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. Joseph said to him, this is its interpretation. The 3 branches are 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will pardon you and restore you to your post. You will place Pharaoh's cup in his hand, as was your custom formerly when you were his cupbearer. But think of me when all is well with you again, and do me the kindness of mentioning me to Pharaoh so as to free me from this place. For in truth, I was kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, nor have I done anything here that they should have put me in the dungeon. When the chief baker saw how favorably he had interpreted, he said to Joseph, in my dream, similarly, there were 3 open-work baskets on my head. In the uppermost basket were all kinds of food for Pharaoh that a baker prepares, and the birds were eating it out of the basket above my head. Joseph answered, this is its interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and impale you upon a pole, and the birds will pick off your flesh. On the 3rd day, his birthday, Pharaoh made a banquet for all his officials, and he singled out his chief cupbearer and his chief baker from among his officials. He restored the chief cupbearer to his cupbearing, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. But the chief baker he impaled, just as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet the chief cupbearer did not think of Joseph. He forgot him.
To be continued.
Wow.
Yeah. So these 2 people who were in jail, they actually had a very important role in society. The cupbearer, they were the testers, right? They had to taste the food before the Pharaoh to make sure it wasn't poisoned.
Mm-hmm.
That's what their jobs were. But no, I'm not going to give an interpretation. But that's why they were in jail. They were mistrusted. Pharaoh did not trust them for one reason or another.
And one lesson I take here, and I've seen it in my career, is there is a society in jail too. There's a hierarchy, and prisoners form relationships, etc. So I can't help but think of the special treatment afforded Joseph when he was in jail, right? It's akin to another Jewish prisoner right now in the news, Ghislaine Maxwell, who seems to have a cushy prison situation and some unique circumstances that might get her and friends of her freed.
Because they are the holders of information that could damage, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like in the same way that the cupbearer and I can't think of the name of the word in English, but they had the power, though their job was to protect the king, they had the power to also poison him.
And wow, what did the poor baker do to deserve being impaled like that? What made him worthy of that kind of harsh ending?
That's a great question.
Mm-hmm.
Why the baker and not the cupbearer?
Well, what Aviva had mentioned, there's a trust issue, and that, in fact, could have changed the response.
You heard the saying, don't let your cookie crumble. That was his mistake.
Some people prefer wine over bread.
Not enough gluten. That's why the cookie crumbled.
Yeah, this is all, an anti fooling around with my bread thing.
But interesting, I think, that the 2 dreams, while they each centered around the 3, the symbolism of the 3 in there, the cupbearer's dream had a whole process. The vine budded, the grapes grew. He took the grapes, he squeezed them into Pharaoh's glass and cup, and the baker just showed up with the stuff on his head, and the birds were pecking at it.
And who knows what happened when the stuff was above his head where he couldn't see it. So was he doing his job of protecting the king? Because anything could have happened, whereas the wine bearer, the cupbearer, supervised the process.
Every step along the
Still
way.
could have, he could have poisoned the king, but he had his eyes on it the whole time.
But did the baker really have a dream? Wouldn't that be more akin to a nightmare? To have birds attacking the top of your head like that?
Yeah,
It was a nightmare.
right. Because if he'd arrived at the palace with his baskets empty, maybe he would have been killed too, just for that. So, yeah. I think that you know, to me, the importance of that part of the story is that it is Joseph cementing his reputation, and his reputation for interpreting dreams can get him in trouble, yet this is what he does. He did, you know, as a youth, he may not have understood that just telling his dreams to his brothers could land him in trouble, that it would cause jealousy. And yet this is what he's known for, Joseph the dream interpreter. So he continues with that at the possibility of gain or of danger to himself.
Is it Joseph the dream interpreter or Joseph the one who trusts in God?
Well, there's all kinds, but Joseph the dream interpreter is one, right? So the ways you are known in society, the name you acquire for yourself are your deeds and how people learn who you are. His relationship with God is not something he could wear on the outside as much as the fact that he could cement his reputation going around saying God is with me. So what? What does it mean to anybody else? But the ability to interpret dreams and then the perseverance to see that through. And I say that I wanted to couple that with what Pharaoh does with that information is a very significant part of the story moving forward. It leads to good things for not just the subjects of the king, the original subjects of the king, but even those who came from the other side because of famine, and it benefited them too.
I was just thinking of how interpreting dreams was used as a device in Fiddler on the Roof also. You know, how it could be manipulative at times. Of course, Shlomo Aleichem made it humorous, but you know, there must have been a lot of that going around too. You know, the misinterpretation of dreams for gain and stuff. And you had to, you know, be kind of good at it to make sure that, you know, it was interpreted the way you intended and you didn't get killed because of it.
Oh, Ruth Ellen, you have your hand up?
Yeah, well, it just hit me looking for symbolism that Joseph recognized what his destiny was, so to speak, and how it would perceive it, as opposed to Jonah, who ran away from it, number one. So then I said to myself, Joseph recognized and accepted the mantle placed upon him by, and so maybe that's what the ornate coat meant, to show somehow to the rest of the world. But because people took it from the selfish point of view and said, oh, he's being placed above me, instead of saying, here's a garment, just like we're talking about the tartans and everything, to identify him as someone who has a special gift that comes out of this faith. And unfortunately, when humanity looks at that from an egocentric way, all they get is jealous or, you know, greedy or what have you. And I'm hitting this in a certain way. We came and hit it last year. The purity of Joseph, really, in a lot of ways, and that maybe in some way he had less wrestling to do. It seems like, apparently, at least from the time he was 17, I'm doing what God is telling me to do, and he just went with that and then didn't work. We don't hear a lot about him suffering when, like when Craig said, why didn't he get a lawyer? Or when he finally says, remember me to the Pharaoh. And even then they didn't. He seems to be taking all of this with stride because his personal comfort in this physical world is not what's guiding him,
Maybe
And,
onto something there that, that he is the model in the Torah, that if you just follow God, everything works out for you.
yeah, I mean, yeah, and we always say Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and we don't think a lot about Joseph. And then what happened to Joseph, and even when we think about that, his covenant, I mean, his legacy went to was divided between his two sons, to make the one tribe, and yet along the way, they're considered part of the lost tribe. So it's very interesting because then it brings it back. All this stuff is lost, and like you were talking about Judah's journey, and how we're called Jews. But if we go back far enough, it took all of us, it took all these different parts to make the whole. And what we're trying to go back to is in that Bereshit, we're all part of that whole. And that's what we forget when we don't continually put these threads together. Why are threads important? Now I'm bringing all the symbolism together, the tzitzit, the threads, the symbolism that we use in the Vayeishev. It's all a way to try to make us recognize how we have to rise above our primitive selves and look at the bigger picture, which again ultimately is we're not going to all live forever, but but our energy, the stuff of us, is going to live forever. And if we can get over the fear of maintaining ourselves in this consciousness, we will be a lot happier. We'll be a lot less fearful, and we'll get along with each other a lot better, right? Okay.
Craig.
Well, I'm thinking about dream interpretation and whether that is really a science. And as a trial lawyer, could I put on an expert witness in dream interpretation? Probably not. So, what is that all about? Is that a divine gift? And before you poo-poo it and say, no, what about Sigmund Freud? He made quite a name for himself interpreting dreams as well. So, I don't know in the Torah if Joseph is imbued with certain supernatural skills to interpret dreams, or he was just a good detective like Freud. So I throw that out there.
Nice.
I don't have an answer at all because I think this is there is no one answer. But let's think about the last time dreams were mentioned in a significant way. It was whose father who had the significant dream that actually changed the designation of the entire
Jacob Platter.
Right. So the subject of dreams is a very important subject, but I think it serves as a platform to differentiate a state where you have control and a state where something is happening when you are supposedly not in control. You're not pulling the strings, but your brain is active. And I think Freud, I mean, it's not for nothing that we remember that Freud was a Jew. There's something about the idea of dreams being so significant, they are biblical, right? We cannot just take dreams and give them the interpretation we want. We have to go back and struggle with what dreams meant before and before and before. And I think Freud really tried to reach at that reach deep into that idea that dreams do not happen in a state where you have control. That's what's kind of unique about them. They happen when you are not. Now, there's lots of, it's interesting, Craig, because you're relatively new to this, but I'd say the first 2 years we were doing this Torah study as this group, we had a woman, I don't remember how she found us, but she actually was kind of related to a friend of ours from our past. And she was all about dreams. Like her whole way that she saw the world had to do with dreams. She actually wrote a book about dreams. It was really, like every time she talked about dreams, it didn't jive with any understanding I ever had about dreams. So she opened my eyes in many ways. But I think that the subject of dreams and the repetition of the subject of dreams and the thread of the subject of dreams is very significant in in a story that has multiple ways that have to be taken into account in order to understand. It adds a dimension that without dreams wouldn't exist. Sarah, and then
I actually worked with her for a while separately from the group with dreams and dream studies.
Was that Joyce?
Yeah. And then of course I have a degree in psychology as well. So I know about Freud, and the subconscious mind is very powerful and very often is not on the surface, but comes through a dream. But one thing I learned in Hasidus is that dreams often have a flaw. So we have to be a little bit careful that a dream could be mostly true, but it could also have a flaw because there's that element of consciousness that might seep in, or some other thing that could seep into the dream. But I believe that the subconscious is very powerful, and what can come forth through that. This is prophecy to me, is the subconscious seeing into the future, the subconscious mind putting together elements in everyday life so that you could see what is beyond. Interesting concept, the subconscious. Not to say that we don't carry in the subconscious mind, which Joyce and I also discuss, past lives. Even if you don't believe in past lives, the genetics of what you carry through the DNA from your past relatives, that's all information, isn't it? And supposedly Torah teaches that at birth you know everything, but then you forget everything. So that's part of that too. So if you knew everything and you knew Torah and you knew everything already, then it's all buried somewhere within you, and can come out in a dream. How beautiful is that? And also frightening. It can be very frightening as well, right?
Ruth Ellen?
Yeah, I was just going to add, as we're like you, we can't really answer Craig's question, but Craig's question, but the point then came to me immediately when he said that. Does it matter? It's almost like the placebo effect. All it is showing that it's a different level of consciousness. It's a distinction from the norm and from what most people are realizing. And I would say, to Sarah's point, why I got involved in it's Jewish mysticism, other mysticism, because again, it's what we put our attention and presence on. And most of us spend most of our life in our conscious minds trying to get ourselves fed, clothed, protected from the weather, et cetera, et cetera. And then our children after us. And we get so wrapped up in that we're all capable of doing what Joseph did, but we don't. So we have these masters have appeared, these people with a different mode of thinking are making us get out of our comfort zone. That's why even if you could say, did Joseph keen observer? That was probably part of it. That's the whole idea of even like in a placebo effect. Or a personal example, my husband did a mentalist act and then I did it with him. And we met Dr. James Moody, who wrote the first one to talk about people who said that they remembered past lives and all that. And we went and we did a performance for people who came to one of his lectures and we're telling them it's not real. And they didn't want to believe us, because I'm telling them things about their dead ancestors. Which again, looking for signs. I'm not going to give away our whole act, but that is the power of belief and the idea that what's happening in our subconscious and in our DNA, everything you're saying, Sarah, exactly. Back then, they didn't have the language for it. And we're blessed to live in a time where we've accumulated a little more vocabulary about how all these ideas could come together.
Arneleo the magician, do you have anything to say about that?
Exactly. You segued right into the fact that around 5:30 today, I'm going to be in Kainaliu at the Kainaliu Kalikimaka and Hanukkah celebration that they didn't mention. but that I'll be in front of Club Rehab doing many of the same prestidigitation and prognostication that Ruth Ellen was talking about. And
Arnie, you're a mentalist?
I'm mental. Yeah, no, I am.
We have to talk. We have to talk later. Okay.
No, I've been doing magic in Kona since 1970 and ran the Magic Spectacular since 1979. I mean, most people know I'm a magician, but yeah, at any rate.
I didn't. And my partner's stage name was Captain Magic, so we definitely must talk later.
Oh, cool. I knew a Captain Magic. Maybe it's the same guy. But at any rate, it blew my mind. I was performing at Yano Hall once for the big Halloween celebration the JC's put on. And I was doing some stuff, and this woman came up to me and she threw over my table with all my props on it and said, "You're the devil! You're the devil! This is evil!" I mean, she totally believed I was doing it. So, I mean, you got to be careful out there, folks. I'm telling you, I take my life in my hands. So please, when you see me perform, don't lead on that it's real magic, okay?
Where can we come to provide security for you today?
Right in front of Club Rehab in Kainaliu.
It's on the way to the new Thought Center, right?
Yeah, Kainaliu is where the Aloha Theater is, Sandy's Drive-In.
At what time are you putting on your show?
Around 5:30, somewhere around there. I'll be doing it for a while. Just close-up magic, stuff that's actually in your hands that's happening without any strange sets or props or lights or anything. It's real magic, I'm telling you.
Are you going to interpret any dreams?
Yes. As a matter of fact, one of my tricks is a dream interpretation where I find the 4 cards you were dreaming of.
Great session, everybody.
Sei gesund. Shabbat.